Director, Excellencies, Admirals, ladies and gentlemen, friends. I am delighted to welcome you all to today's event on maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. We are here at the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub, better known as the Hub, at Allied Joint Forces Command in Naples. My name is Dr. Ralby, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator today. We have an extremely exciting and interesting event ahead of us where we'll be discussing piracy in the Gulf of Guinea and what can be done about it. But before we begin, I want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we will be recording this event, so please keep your videos off unless you are one of the panelists, because only the panelists should be visible during this event. And please also keep your microphones muted because it will not allow you to speak. So in other words, please use the chat function as much and as frequently as possible, because we will be monitoring that and we will be taking all the questions from all the participants. On that front, I should note that this is the highest event in terms of numbers of registrants in the Hub's history. And I credit all of you for coming here. I'm so glad to see so many friends and familiar names on the list. But I also want to congratulate all the organizations who are doing so much to contribute to counter piracy, not just in the Gulf of Guinea, but around the world, and thank them all for joining us today. I also want to emphasize that this event may be recorded, but the speakers are operating under a policy of non-attribution. So if you are going to in any way cite this event, please feel free to cite the content of it, but do not attribute it to any of the speakers without specific permission from them in order to quote what they have said. Before I say more about the content today, let me introduce the director of the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub. Please, Director, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Brigadier General Aydin Kiliç, an STS Hub Director, which is, in short, we referred as the Hub, NATO Strategic Direction South Hub. Thank you, each and every one of you, for attending this webinar. In recent years, Gulf of Guinea has experienced an unprecedented rise in the number of piracy, armed robbery against ships. Gulf of Guinea is an integral part of the global system of maritime trade, and its sea routes connect and sustain international shipping. Maritime security is essential to maintaining trade flows, energy security that contributes to the stability in the region. While Gulf of Guinea countries have strived to strengthen their legal, institutional, and operational efforts, there are still shortfalls. Gulf of Guinea is of strategic importance and a top priority for us for the Hub to enhance and develop an understanding of potential medium to long-term challenges and opportunities within the Gulf of Guinea region. We had in the last year we had an event that was covering that aimed to provide an situational awareness on maritime security in Gulf of Guinea. And with this webinar, with your participation, we are aiming to identify opportunities and recommendations to support Gulf of Guinea countries, improving regional maritime security in accordance with UN Security Council Resolution 2634. Joint Force Command Naples and the Hub, through collaboration, are aiming to enhance understanding of myriad of issues which directly affect peace, security, and stability and development across the Gulf of Guinea region, now and into the future. Our vision is that anything is possible and achievable if we pull all together. I am very hopeful that the collaborative effort between organizations and entities will produce excellent results, improving regional maritime security. This webinar is a great opportunity to share visions, perspectives on security issues that affect Gulf of Guinea region, reinforcing a common understanding of the challenges in the region. To that end, we are here to listen to you and listen carefully. And now I give the floor to our moderator, Dr. Ralby.
Thank you very much for that, Director. I think we are sitting at a time of tremendous change. I said that 2 years ago when we had the last webinar, And yet that seems to be even more the case now. I think that when we talk about maritime security, we have to remember a couple of things. First of all, while we are typically very land-centric in our lives because we all live on land, we often forget the importance of the maritime domain to that life on land. And we need to remember that without shipping, we do not have our way of life as it stands. Many of us use the expression, no shipping, no shopping. And that is very true no matter whether you are on the coast or several hundred miles from it in a landlocked, or as some call it, a land-linked state. But we also need to remember that a major source of food for the world at a time where we are already experiencing a food price crisis and soon to experience a food availability crisis comes from the sea. 20% of global dietary protein comes from fish. So just as much as it is true, no shipping, no shopping, no fish, no food. And at the same time, we are, thanks to the pandemic, increasingly concerned about how much we are able to engage in person. And we rely on internet technology for continuing to engage with people all over the world. And just as much as it is true, no shipping, no shopping, and no fish, no food, it is equally true, no cables, no communication. Because the very internet on which we are using this platform today runs on submarine cables that traverse the ocean floor. And so our maritime domain is maybe out of sight and out of mind for many, but it is integral to all of our lives every single day. And so securing that maritime space is vital to all of us. Let me say for just a moment, though, why NATO may be the right forum for hosting this conversation at this time. NATO has experienced over the last several months a strategic shock because on the 24th of February, of course, NATO's historic adversary, Russia, invaded Ukraine right on Europe's doorstep and broke open a whole new era of reevaluating both our security and our understanding of the rules-based order. But I actually want to direct your attention back 20 days before that incident that has changed so many of our lives and our discussions since late February, and focus on an event that occurred pretty much obscurity on the 4th of February in the outskirts of the Beijing Olympics, because on the 4th of February, China and Russia signed a trade deal. That trade deal was effectively the economic guarantee that provided Russia with the certainty that it could, no matter what kind of sanctions were imposed on it, survive economically the advent of any kind of response to an invasion of Ukraine. And we are seeing that coming true to this day. And so just as much as Russia may be the traditional adversary of NATO, China is very much involved as well. And China was very much part of our conversation when we spoke about maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea several years ago. At the same time, we are also seeing now the involvement of Iran and other actors in the fight in Ukraine. And all this brings us to the point that no matter where we are on Earth and no matter what our focus, the challenge of security at this point is truly one of a global nature. And just as the maritime world touches all of our lives, security is no longer a geographic concept. It is truly a global one. And so NATO is in a position where it needs to really think about how to combat its adversaries, not just where they sit in terms of capital cities, but where they operate and act in ways that can diminish security. And so one of the things that we are going to try to do today is ascertain the extent to which NATO has a role, if any, and that is very much up for discussion, in helping not just combat piracy, but provide and support security in the Gulf of Guinea, an area that is vital to much of our trade and much of our lives, not just in Europe, but around the world. At the same time, the Gulf of Guinea is in a challenging place. 10 years ago, we were all talking about Gulf of Guinea piracy being on the rise. But in fact, many of us were using the term piracy as a colloquial term, not a legal one. As a lawyer, I was often the one first to say, no, this is not piracy, this is armed robbery at sea. Because what we were seeing at the time was extensive numbers of attacks, but inside the territorial sea of the coastal states of West and Central Africa. And many of those attacks weren't focused on kidnap for ransom or holding vessels for ransom. They were focused on theft of oil. With the changes in the oil market over the last decade, we have seen changes induced in lockstep with the piracy models. And over that time, the piracy model has evolved. And it has become much more similar to what NATO had been facing a decade ago in Operation ocean shield off the Horn of Africa, where Somali pirates at the time were attacking vessels as much as 500 plus miles offshore and holding the vessels and their crew for ransom. And so the increased use of kidnap for ransom as a tactic certainly came to a head in 2020. During the pandemic, many of us had our lives come to a halt, but piracy was actually booming during that time because the one thing that continued to move to make sure all of our supply chains were met was the maritime industry. And so we saw piracy actually take hold as a really critical feature of life in the Gulf of Guinea in 2020, where 95% of all seafarers taken at sea in that year were taken in the Gulf of Guinea. And so 10 years ago, when we were talking about piracy, we saw two UN Security Council resolutions come forward. 2018 in 2011 and 2039 in 2012. And both of those resolutions put forward the notion that states needed to work together to cooperate to combat piracy. While one state might not have the resources or the capacity to combat the scourge of piracy itself, together the region could do it. And so out of those resolutions, we saw the advent of the Yaoundé Code of Conduct and the Yaoundé Architecture for Maritime Security, which has become the focal point for how to combat piracy at the regional level and the interregional level in West and Central Africa. And so just as a quick summary, we will have with us later today the director of the Interregional Coordination Center, Rear Admiral Narciso Jr., and he sits atop the apex of a very, in some ways, complicated but sensible maritime security cooperation architecture. So the Interregional Coordination Center sits in Yaoundé, Cameroon, and beneath it are two regional centers, one in Central Africa, Crest-Mac, based in Pointe-Noire, Congo, and one in West Africa, Crest-Mayo, based in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire. Under each of those centers are a series of zones, and the zones may not line up in terms of the alphabet because we have zones A, D, E, F, and G, but it's important to note that while Zone A has not yet been fully operationalized, Zone D actually predates all of this architecture, and the states of Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, and Sao Tome have been cooperating for over 10 years now, since 2009, on a daily basis. And retired Captain Luc Maduma, who's with us today, will share a little bit about that cooperation later. But I want to congratulate the states of Zone G, because just this past week, they have finally come to an agreement on operationalizing their own zone, which will cover the northwesternmost portion of the Gulf of Guinea, and the zone will be based in Praia Cabo Verde. So congratulations to Zone G. With that security cooperation architecture, we have seen a tremendous shift in the piracy elements, and we have seen over the time since our last discussion here at the Hub, a major downturn in piracy. And so we have this conversation now at the lowest point of piracy in the Gulf of Guinea in the last 30 years, but right in the wake of a new UN Security Council resolution produced on the 31st of May this year. So that new resolution, which was put forward jointly by the states of Ghana and Norway, and supported by the African Union, provides us today the framework for our discussion. And so we're going to focus today on not only what this new Security Council resolution means and the context in which it is now operationalizing, but what it could do in the future to actually not just diminish piracy, but continue to change the circumstances to ensure that piracy does not return. And we also want to, at the same time, be looking for what role NATO may have in that process. So just in very brief terms, I want to introduce our first panel today, because the panelists are exceptional, and I want to give them the opportunity to speak extensively on this. How we are going to operate is that each of the panelists will speak for about 10 minutes, and then we will have an open discussion. And that discussion is actually free for all of you as well to join in. But please, as I mentioned before, contribute your questions via the chat function, and I will do my best to reiterate them to the panelists as they come up. So the first panel will focus on this UN Security Council resolution and help us understand what it says, what it means, why it's necessary, and really what it is all about in terms of changing the dynamics for the region. And to do that, we have an exceptional set of 4 speakers. The first is Ambassador Dr. Namira Negm. She is the former African Union legal counsel who had the portfolio for the Africa Integrated Maritime Strategy 2050. And she comes to this conversation with not only an exceptional legal background, but also the background of having been the focal point for the African Union on making sense of how to bring forward maritime security throughout the continent over the next several decades. The second speaker will be Dr. Kamal-Deen Ali, who joins us on the sidelines of another event today from South Africa. So thank you for making the time. He is the former Director of Studies at the Ghana Armed Forces Higher Command Staff College. He is now the Director of SEM Laws after an illustrious career in the Ghana Navy. And he is one of the leading maritime law experts in the entire continent and indeed in the entire world. He is also the author of an exceptional book in 2016 published by Brill, I guess it was 2015, published by Brill, called Maritime Security Cooperation in the Gulf of Guinea, Prospects and Challenges, and I commend that to all of you. The third speaker will be a close friend and colleague, Professor Dr. Ashish Malakias, who has recently rejoined the Africa Center for Strategic Studies at the U.S. Department of Defense, and joins us today from his new role as Dean there, as he has been out in California for the last several years at California Maritime University as the Dean there. So it is great to have him back in this conversation. And finally, we have a voice that I think is really important for all of us to hear, which is that of George Mangos, who is a co-principal of the InterUnity Group, a fleet management company that manages roughly 70 vessels and brings to us the perspective of industry. Because as we said, no shipping, no shopping. As a result, it's quite important to hear from those who are responsible for ensuring those ships continue to flow. So I will give a pause now and allow for all of the speakers to come and join us for this conversation. So let me turn the floor first to Ambassador Dr. Namira Negm.
Good day, everybody, and thank you very much, Dr. Aydin, for this introduction, and for NATO South Hub for having this hopefully very fruitful discussion and timely one. Let me start by saying that criminal activities are intertwined, and transnational crimes knows no borders. Why we're saying this? Because when we speak about the Security Council resolution on the Gulf of Guinea that has just been adopted recently, it's important to identify why do we believe it's necessary at this stage that the Security Council has adopted that decision, despite that the illicit activities in the Gulf of Guinea reached its lowest point since a very long time. In reality, reaching the lowest point doesn't mean it ended. So this is something very important to identify. The resolution touched upon many legal issues, starting by naming the legal framework on the international and regional level, where the illicit activities that are taking place in the Gulf of Guinea should be tackled, including UNCLOS, of course, and also the African Maritime Charter, the strategy, as you mentioned, the Yawendi Code of Conduct, and it stressed also the role of international organizations' rules when it comes to combating piracy, illicit activities, and transnational crimes. Here, it's very important to state that even in the preamble of this resolution, it didn't mention piracy alone. It actually spoke of piracy, armed robbery, and transnational organized crimes. So here, when we are talking about those three elements, it's basically capturing all types of crimes that we can perceive taking place, and not only piracy, which is also very important, because when we speak about transnational crimes, we are speaking about IU fishing, we are speaking about slavery, we are speaking about many other illicit trade and activities that take place at sea that may not fall under the definition of piracy or armed robbery. So this is also very important for us to note as the scope of this resolution. Most importantly, I would say that this resolution stressed on the aspect of universal jurisdiction, because when we speak about tracing perpetrators and making sure to bring them to trials, this is one of the major issues we are facing when it comes to piracy and illicit activities at sea, because states either lack the ability or they're unwilling to carry out their I would say responsibility to bring perpetrators of such crimes, especially in the high seas, before tribunals to be prosecuted. It's very important also to note that this resolution spoke of harmonizing the different legal frameworks. I mentioned at the beginning that we have so many legal institutions and legal instruments that address maritime security and illicit activities at sea. So stressing this harmonization, I think it's crucial because we have so many now in place, and maybe member states, at least for the African Union, I can tell, member states will be overwhelmed with the amount of documents and responsibilities they have to work on. It's also important to see that this resolution sets the tone in relation to following up the proceeds of the illicit crimes at sea. And I think this is very, very important for the countries of the Gulf of Guinea, because they are attached to the Sahel region, where we have terrorism and a lot of illegal acts. So following the proceeds and making sure that the proceeds coming from the illicit activities that are taking place in the Gulf of Guinea will not be used in other illicit activities, including terrorism. I think this is crucial. And that's why when we speak about security and maritime security, we cannot say in one region and forget about the rest, because as I mentioned, at the end of the day, all the criminal activities are intertwined and they have no borders. So they will keep crossing borders and be involved in other crimes. It's like a cycle. The important also aspect in this resolution, it touched upon the root causes of the illicit activities, which is an ongoing thing, because at this stage, with the level of piracy and robbery went down in the Gulf of Guinea, but still the rest of the root cause, especially the socioeconomic reasons, the aspects that, as I mentioned, terrorism, for financing of terrorism that is attached to the illicit activities that are taking place at sea, having that in the resolution as well helps a lot to make sure that this element will not be forgotten, and make sure that we will have to keep the engagement ongoing between different institutions together with the Gulf of Guinea states to make sure that such crimes will be counted. Now, if we go to the other element that has been touched upon by this resolution, which is also very important, is the international cooperation. You've just mentioned that this resolution was tabled by Ghana and Norway. So why Norway, for example? It's not in the Gulf of Guinea, but Norway, because the Norwegians had already assisted member states of the Gulf of Guinea in countering piracy there. So this is something that's like, it shows that the international cooperation bears fruition, and it's important to continue this kind of cooperation to make sure that we will not come back again in this meeting room a couple of months later or a year from now to say, oh, we still have, again, not only piracy, but we have also rise again in different illegal activities in the Gulf of Guinea and the area surrounding it. Also, I think it's very important that I would note here, because that is in relation to all the organizations that are working with the states of Gulf of Guinea, and also those who are aspiring to play a role on the ground out there, that the resolution reminded us of the sovereignty of the Gulf of Guinea states. It reminded us also that the prime responsibility for countering illicit activities at the Gulf of Guinea is bestowed upon the Gulf of Guinea states. However, it's also very important to note that this cannot be done in lacunae of the international cooperation. And that's why it was mentioned in tandem together. So here, when we speak about the fundamentals of international law, this resolution reminded us with it. But again, it reminded us of the importance of this kind of cooperation. And I do believe here, although it's not mentioned clearly, but it has to do also with the areas beyond national jurisdiction. Because if we speak about the areas that within the national jurisdiction, yes, the states have the absolute sovereignty over it. But when we go on the areas beyond the national jurisdiction, in order to be able to counter the kind of piracy and armed robbery that is taking place at sea now in the Gulf of Guinea, it's very important to continue and make sure that we honor the hot pursuit, we make sure that we assist the states in the hot pursuit, especially those who have very small navies. This is like in a nutshell what comes, which is like the importance of that resolution. And maybe the last thing I want to touch upon before I conclude is in relation to the energy, because the Gulf of Guinea is important because of the oil. And we have already witnessed, like I think it was last month, when we heard that there was an illicit pipeline of Nigerian oil working for almost 9 years with nobody discovering it. So here, with the ongoing crisis in the world, you mentioned the food crisis, I would mention the energy crisis, which is anyways now affecting even migration, because now we might face the other way around, northern migration towards the south, because they cannot bear the cold and the snow because there is no energy to warm their homes. So this is very important for the security of not only the region, Africa and the world, to make sure that the energy supply as much as possible is sustained, to make sure that we will not face extra crises than what we are facing now. I'll stop at that and I'll be happy to entertain questions. Thank you very much.
Madam Ambassador, thank you so much for an absolutely outstanding opening to this conversation. I'll now just turn the floor over to Dr. Kamal-Deen Ali, and I hope he can join us via video. If he's, yes, there he is. Kamal, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aydin, and thanks to the first speaker for actually outlining very important dimensions of this resolution and capturing them in a way that is very deep. It gives me the opportunity then to kind of bottom down and speak about a few minor, few issues in the text of the resolution, building upon the first intervention, but more or less also providing dimensions that are needed to be captured. The first is that coincidentally, Ghana was a co-sponsor of this resolution. And I say coincidentally because I'm speaking on that and I'm from Ghana. And that brings in perspectives that may be peculiar to me, but also to the larger discussion. If Ghana was and is a co-sponsor of the resolution, one of the key issues that we need to look at is how much is the security represented in this particular resolution, in the context that the discourse around the security is universal, it is inclusive, not only in the context of Ghana, but in the global context. And one will also be keen to ask questions such as how much consultation, for example, did Ghana have nationally leading up to this resolution and regionally leading up to this resolution? These questions are important because there is always the need for us to look at where something comes from and to what extent it addresses issues that are collective. what I do know is that in the lead up to this resolution, there was very little or less consultation between Ghana, for example, and member states in the region. The question then is it that Ghana knew, for example, as a country, how to collectively address maritime security on behalf of the whole region? And nationally, speaking for Ghana, one is interested also in the question is how comprehensive will Ghanaians see this resolution in addressing maritime security for Ghana? So these are the preliminary comments that we cannot do without. The resolution, in a way, builds upon the previous resolutions of 2011, Resolution 2018, and Resolution 2039 of 2012. So there are very, very many provisions that are very similar. In certain respects, though, this resolution have broadened the scope, at least in text, but whether in substantive context, it is the same of what maritime security is. As noted by the previous speaker, for example, very early in the resolution, unlike the previous resolutions that were largely centered on piracy, with limited reference to broader transnational organized crime, you have very early in the preamble that this resolution talks about transnational organized crime, and even talked about sustainable development of the states. So these two terms are very important, that one is transnational organized crime and the other is sustainable development of the states. So having mentioned this in the preamble, one will then expect that within the same preamble and in the substantive provisions, that there will be a norm setting or a global setting mechanism to achieve these broader transnational organized crime objectives, and how that relates to the sustainable development of the states. Again, in this resolution, unlike the previous resolution, there is specific reference to the SWA Convention and its protocol of 2005, which gives, again, another broader dimension to this resolution. Perhaps the preamble referred to the SWA Convention and protocol in this context, unlike the previous resolutions, because subsequently, one will see that terrorism is drawn into the context of this resolution. So my view is that the SWA reference to the SWA protocol in the initial preamble was meant to lay the foundation for us to draw in this aspect of terrorism. And it is also in the same context that this resolution also talked about how funds that are accrued from piracy and armed robbery, that is a ransom payment, for example, may be used in financing terrorism. But again, that raises two fundamental questions. The question is, really, when we speak about terrorism, even outside the maritime scope, in the Gulf of Guinea and the Sahel region, what really do we mean by terrorism? There are broader social, political, and economic issues, largely, arguably, that 90% may account for what is called terrorism. Yet again, we are having a resolution that seems not to speak about some of those substantive issues that may be 80% that account for what is classified as terrorism, but going on now to link that to the maritime setting. The question is the maritime resolution being seen as a conduit of the broader dialogue in terrorism, while ignoring some of the fundamental causes of what is called terrorism in the Sahel region? So far, though, we haven't seen any particular link between proceeds from maritime crimes such as ransom and terrorism. So why is that particularly pitched in this particular resolution? And that is a very interesting dimension to look at. Yet again, this resolution in the preamble referred to the root causes, that those root causes have to be addressed. In previous resolutions, this wasn't mentioned at all. And I'm not sure whether the involvement of the AU in this resolution, which has been mentioned for the first time also. Previous resolutions really didn't mention much about the AU, but there has been a number of mention about the African Union in this resolution, and whether that is what has accounted for reference to the root causes. Because the truth is that within the African continent, whilst the AU has always taken a broader look at maritime security, when it comes to the Gulf of Guinea, ECOWAS and ECAS context, maritime security has been looked at much in a narrow way, especially in the context of crime and piracy. So I don't know whether for the first time, whether there's a global interest in addressing these root causes, or whether it is the presence of the African Union in the context of this resolution that has pushed that dimension. But presumably so, if there is interest in addressing those broader causes, it is important to ask whether the substantive provisions later on said anything much about that. What are some of those root causes? Are those root causes completely within the context of the Gulf of Guinea, or there are international and casual links to some of these root causes? For example, are we looking at broader issues such as depleting fisheries? Are we looking at things like, which may not necessarily be accounting for piracy now, but we do know that environmental concerns in the Niger Delta provided some of the basis for current piracy. Are we looking at the broader restriction, or if you want, the contriving of spaces for fisheries, for example, because of offshore oil and gas activities? So what really do we mean by these root causes? Or are we simply looking at some of the governance deficits within the Gulf of Guinea region? So trying to have a broader understanding of these root causes in the context of this resolution is important. But this resolution also, for the first time, in the preamble, mentions things like democracy, youth, women, and human rights. There hasn't been too much development of this in the substantive provisions beyond being mentioned in the resolution. One would have thought that it will be important to do that so that we see what is mentioned in the preamble and how this is dealt with further. But in the broader context, for example, we see a number of issues. For example, the livelihood of women, in particular in the Gulf of Guinea, is being severely depleted across the region now. Many women have lost livelihood, they've lost investment because fisheries is running out. And one would have thought that this will be something that is developed further in the substantive provision, but that has not been the case. And in the area of human rights, for example, whilst, for example, there will be operational justification and legal justification, for example, the Danish frigate incident, what are some of the human rights consequences that flow from that? Again, a general reference in the preamble, but not much has been mentioned in that regard. There are a few things that perhaps we want to mention before I conclude, and I'm happy to answer further questions. For example, in the substantive provision, again in the preamble, there is reference to oil and cargo theft, which again is an attempt to broaden the resolution. Previous resolutions have used either transnational organized crime, but really didn't go into detail. But if you want to look at the root causes again, then we have to look at it broadly. How do we link the oil theft to where the oil is? Who are the local collaborators within the region? And in implementing and expanding this, who are the external collaborators? Finally, as I said, there hasn't been much mention about IUU in this resolution. There is mention about it in the preamble. There is reference to the FCWC, that is Fisheries Committee for West and Central Africa, in the preamble, but in the substantive provision, there is not. Interestingly, I saw at some point the draft resolution, which at that point had some references, some much more definite references to IUU. The final resolutions didn't include that. It is because I also guessed and I heard that there was so much context as to this issue about distant water fishing and who is responsible, whether that is classified as IUU, but that is certainly a matter that is very important for the Gulf of Guinea region. And it's also interesting that in doing this resolution, that Ghana, for example, which is a host to a lot of distant water fishing fleet, to the detriment of the Ghanaian community and the Ghanaian coastal community, actually was sponsoring a resolution where there was a reference to external interest in fisheries in the Gulf of Guinea. I found that to be very interesting from a national perspective, but subsequently, as I said, that particular reference has been deleted. So to sum up, just one final thing to mention. Again, there is new things added in this resolution, reference to shade, reference to Gulf of Guinea, Friends of the Gulf of Guinea, reference to European Union Coordinated Maritime Patrol, and the South Atlantic Center that has been established in Azores. These are very important because it's, in one respect, brings the global community to talk about something that concerns all of us. But another thing that you cannot help but talk about in the context of the Gulf of Guinea is always how much security in the Gulf of Guinea is driven by external effort as compared to internal effort. As much as the external effort is positive, it certain times do have certain dimensions. I have seen, for example, in the Gulf of Guinea, where there is fatigue, complete fatigue over many programs and projects in addressing maritime security in the region. But when it comes to the practical, benefits and of these programs, it speaks about a different thing. So how much do we balance these external references and this external interest in Gulf of Guinea maritime security with the effort of the region and taking into consideration the regional context? I think I will end it here, and I'm happy to make further interventions when there is the opportunity during the questions and answer time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kamal-Deen Ali. You have brought up so many interesting and important points. I know that I have a whole list of questions for you when we get to that. So I really appreciate those thought-provoking remarks. Let me now turn to Dr. Ashish Malakias, who I hope will be able to join us on camera. There he is. Ashish, the floor is yours.
Well, Ian, thank you very much for the invitation. It's good to see you, and it's good to see my dear colleagues and friends who have been operating in this domain for many, many years. And thank you for the invitation to offer a couple of contributions. I'll pick up on a key word, which is downturn. There's been a downturn in piracy incidents in the Gulf of Guinea. And it's important that we don't celebrate too quickly, because downturn basically says, well, there's a direction down, but we are not talking about the disappearance of this problem. The problem has not disappeared. And the resolution itself speaks to the underlying causes. And I want to spend a few minutes touching on this. My dear friend, Dr. Kamal Ali Dean, touched on some of these issues, but I want to go a bit deeper to make the point that pirates maybe in a way, let's put it this way, and I say this in the context of Somali piracies as well. Maybe they're just going on holidays, we should expect them to come back, to return from the holidays. Maybe when the money they've extracted from their activities is dwindled. But let me go back to the underlying causes to argue the reason why I believe that piracy will continue. The conditions for piracy are there. The conditions for piracy are there because if you look at what's going on land, there's a deficit of the conditions that a good society should have. And a good society should not produce too many pirates. when we look at the Gulf of Guinea states, there should be 5 key conditions: legal conditions, political conditions, security conditions, economic conditions, and social conditions. The legal conditions are not there. And my dear friend, Kamal-Deen could speak to this for many, many hours. And yourself, Ian, you guys are the legal experts. But for myself, when I look at these states, I ask the question, how many of these states have a solid social contract upon which the legal foundations of a good society should be built? Not many. Because the social contract is not there, you do not have the institutions, the legal institutions that really should support the good society. And because of that, the political conditions are not there. And we see that politically, many of these states in the Gulf of Guinea are fragile. There's some, very important fragilities in the political systems of these countries. The centrality of the citizen, which should be really a feature of good functioning political systems, the centrality of the citizen is not always there. We have the centrality of maybe institutions, you have the centrality of perhaps parties, individuals, elites, and so on and so forth within the political domain. But we would expect a healthy society, a healthy political system to have the citizen at its very, very, very core. The security conditions, because the legal conditions and the political conditions are deficient, well, you have really security conditions in the region that could be improved. And I'm not going to delve into those details, but the resolution itself links what's going on in the Gulf of Guinea and terrorism. And that is to say, speaks to the bigger picture of insecurity in the region. Well, it's very difficult to have good economic conditions if you don't have those preconditions that I just mentioned. So what you have in the Gulf of Guinea is the coexistence of poverty on the one hand, but abundance of resources on the other. And that equation is very, very problematic, because young people understand that the resources are there. Young people understand that their region is very, very rich in terms of resources. Yet they look around and see poverty, abject poverty in many cases. And this speaks to my other condition, the social conditions, which are really can be improved, let's put it this way. So when you put all of these conditions together, onshore, you can see how they will have very negative repercussions offshore, because as we all know, there's a very direct link between what's going on offshore and what goes on onshore. So this is just to contextualize the importance of this resolution, because he speaks to the underlying conditions. He speaks to the underlying causes, and we need to pay attention to this. I like a couple other points in the resolution. He speaks to the need to develop national maritime strategies. So it's not just about the regional infrastructure or architecture, the owner code of conduct, for example. The resolution speaks to the need to do the work that must be done at the national level, beginning with the development and implementation of national security strategies. So I like the resolution. I like the resolution because in many ways brings us back to the basics, but also forces us to look forward. It points to the need to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the UNO Code of Conduct, but also very directly encourages the states to do more, to fully implement it, to fully implement the architecture. The architecture is 10 years old. It has taken very important steps towards implementation, but is not fully implemented. So the resolution basically is applauding the work that has already been done, the good work that has already been done, but is pointing very, very, in a very direct way, is pointing to the work that still remains to be done. Ian, I will stop here for now, and I look forward to any questions from yourself and from the audience, if any. Thank you.
Ashish, thank you so much. That was an absolutely fantastic, non-legal perspective, which I think is a really important point to note. Our first two speakers were both lawyers, but you brought to light some of the color of what these root causes mean and how we can actually start to envision what implementation of this UN Security Council resolution might look like. And so we'll definitely come back to that topic a lot more in the second panel as well. But I have some questions I look forward to posing towards you in just a few minutes. But let me first turn to George Mangos and let him round out the first four speakers. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I mean, I would also say, obviously, I'm going to also add a non-legal perspective. And I think as a representative of commercial shipping, I probably have the narrowest focus, I think, of any, certainly of any of the panelists. Our focus effectively is looking at the reduction of friction of trade in and out of the region. It, of course, having the obvious bearing on GDP for the region. So for us, it means getting vessels in and out safely, getting crews in and out safely. It means material and equipment. It means maintenance and facilities, and above all, of course, it means security. It's very interesting, I think, for me to be able to listen here and understand from this very educated and very esteemed panel, really understand, let's say, the multi-dimensional aspects that all of you have to deal with on a daily basis. I think also it's important to note, as has been mentioned, that piracy is, let's say, piracy in the broad sense of the word is at its low point in the Gulf of Guinea. Of course, with tempering it, let's say, with some caution as to what the future direction is. But I also think that, even this, let's say, positive development is not highlighted at all outside of the circle of participants that are directly involved in the security of the region. So I think it does highlight the importance of having direct engagement, with the industry, so that we can understand better the challenges that you face and understand, the steps that we need to do. So I will make reference in my very, very simplistic understanding of things, certain initiatives that we have been led to believe have had a significant impact in the space. One that I've come across, Deep Blue. I understand that Deep Blue's impact in Nigeria has been very significant, but it would be interesting for us to try and understand, what is the nature of it? Will it run out? Will it be replaced, with something, let's say, that comes afterwards? I would say that again, nodding towards the improving conditions of the space, we do also still have, let's say, a number of concerns that for the future direction, including, there's a couple of points that I wanted to raise quickly. I note that, or I've been informed that in mid-May of this year, there was a new law that was passed in Nigeria, which prohibits the payment of ransoms. And that has potentially very significant ramifications for us to know that, you know, if we're able basically to make KNR payments and secure the release of crew members, I think that's something I would be very interested to hear thoughts on. I would also highlight, although I note certainly that it's the exception, not the rule, that there are also certain incidents that occur after a piracy incident. For example, there was a case that started in October 2021 of a vessel that had a security incident outside of Benin and was then detained with all the crew for a further 3 months on shore while the local authorities were undertaking their investigations, which which were rather pointed investigations, we understand. So things like that, it would be very useful to try and understand. And like I say, I mean, you know, I come here with a narrow focus. What I really hope to try and take away is a much deeper understanding. And the bit that I will certainly do is I will be relaying to all and sundry within our industry all the things that I hear and I learn from this panel. Thank you very much.
George, thank you so much. And I think that point is actually really important because, you know, part of the mission of the hub and part of what I think many of us have tried to do over the years is start connecting between some of the circles and communities that tend to be quite insular and speak to each other, but maybe not branch out very much. And it is actually quite remarkable how much we have yet to do to create a community that includes all the different actors who are responsible for different elements of this situation. And that certainly, I think perhaps first and foremost includes the maritime industry. So let me now start the discussion with a couple of questions that I want to pose to all of you. I am tempted to jump into a couple specific follow-ups, and I'll do that in a minute. And we've also gotten already a number of questions coming in from the participants. But I want to start with the question of where do we draw the line? Because this seems to be a security-focused UN Security Council resolution. Many have classified it as primarily a piracy-focused resolution. And yet, as Ashish told us, there are really 5 layers or 5 different factors of which security is only one that all need to be targeted in order to accomplish the goal stated in the resolution of addressing the root causes of piracy. So how do we actually, particularly since many of us don't have either the background or the mandate to counter all 5 of those different areas, where do we draw the line on what we focus on, and how do we perhaps include more participants in the process to address those root causes? And since you brought up those 5 elements, Ashish, if you're willing to take that one first, I will turn to you.
Sure, Ian. You know, I think that this is must be a joint effort by all stakeholders. I have identified what I believe are the key factors, but you know, different people would identify other factors. I think the key point here is to have conversations like the one we're having right now, putting the key factors on the table, identifying the key actors behind those, the key actors that can intervene to shape those dynamics in each one of those spheres. For example, if we're talking about the security conditions, how do we affect the security environment in Africa? How do we shape that environment? Then we have to identify the key security players in the region, at the national, I would say even starting at the local level. At the local level, the national level, the regional level, and the inter-regional level. And then in making sure that we build practical platforms, practical architectures that promote collaboration, promote cooperation, promote the pooling of resources, promote the defining of the key strategic objectives that we can all achieve together, that we must all achieve together. I think that that's really the way to do it. And so once you do this for each one of those critical factors, then you're getting closer and closer to at least understanding the problem and then maybe addressing possible solutions. Over to you, Ian.
Well, can I just challenge you directly before turning to others on that one? Because my question in follow-up then is, we already have so many different platforms, right? Several of them have been mentioned. You've got the Yaoundé architecture, which itself has numerous different centers. And then we have all kinds of other things. We have the regional economic communities like ECOWAS and ECAS, plus the Gulf of Guinea Commission. Now we have the Shade, we have the Coordinated Maritime Presence, we have the Friends of the Gulf of Guinea FOG, we have the center in the Azores, we have all these different centers and initiatives and fora for interacting. Do we try to make use of what we already have and start to try to better deconflict or coordinate some of those activities? Or do we say, you know what, let's get everybody together, scrap all of this, and focus on something that, as you say, is more practical or direct in terms of targeting these needs? Over.
Absolutely correct. The two key words there are practical and coordination. That's really, really important. Ian, you and I have been working in this particular field for a long time. And many of the initiatives are not very practical. And Kamal that's his point. That's his point. That's Kamal's point. And that's been Kamal's point since day one. We've been working on this for many, many years. To what degree is there an alignment between the external interventions and the local needs and the national needs? If there's alignment, that means it's practical. If there's no alignment, that means it's not practical. For me, that's critical. And then there has to be coordination among the external actors, and then coordination among the local partners. There has to be coordination, and then there has to be a point of convergence between the external interventions and the work at the national local level. Those 2 points, Ian, are critically important. I'm not saying let's throw the baby out with the bathwater, but what I'm suggesting is that we have to push towards an evolution. We have to push towards architecture 2.0. What does that look like? And how can we work together to get there? And that's work that I think needs to begin. If it has not begun yet, it needs to begin very, very soon, bringing together all the players and ask the question, okay, what do we do next to achieve the strategic objective that we are all aiming for?
Kamal, may I turn to you and ask a direct follow-up? First of all, I think many of us have talked about this many times in many different places around the continent and indeed around the world over the years. And I suspect we see similarly on some of these issues. But my question to you, Kamal, is that you mentioned that this entire process of developing security is typically externally driven. It is not coming from within the region as much as it could or should be. And so how can we be, as external actors, supportive of getting that organically driven evolution that Ashish is talking about? Over.
Ian, I think a couple of important things. Of course, if we trace back the piracy and counter-piracy efforts and how that reflected in resolutions in the Gulf of Guinea, you cannot take away the regional dimension of it, starting from the leadership of Benin in that that resulted in the first resolution. And over the years, although there was a deficit, even Chris Mark was doing something far ahead of what was done in resolution 2039. And then there has been a lot of regional efforts. So there is actually a convergence of those regional efforts and global efforts. So one cannot say that it is something that is entirely driven from external. No, that cannot be the point, because it caters for regional needs and has taken into consideration regional needs as much as global needs. I think the point of, if you want, of emphasis, or the point that is being stressed here, having moved from resolutions 2018 to resolution 2039 and resolutions and the current resolution, I think 2634, one would have been looking for a much more, for example, reference is always made to regional leadership and regional responsibility. But I believe essentially that regional or national leadership will have to be engaged more and will have to be demanded more. For example, as much as we are addressing issues of piracy, we have to demand from Gulf of Guinea states, for example, stewardship over the way fishery resources are being handled. We are talking about broader resolutions at the level of the UN. And if we are talking about broader resolutions at the level of the UN, and as much as in other issues, we are able to engage the responsibility and demand the accountability of countries, we ought to demand also more the responsibility and accountability of Gulf of Guinea states, just not in the context of piracy, but even the way they are running fisheries and the way this can cause dislocation in the coastal community. So it is not a question that what is being addressed is external driven. It is also the dimension that some other elements that are very, very important, which necessarily one is not saying that it is caused by external factors. No, some of them are necessarily decisions that are made internally. For example, it's decisions that are made internally in Ghana that accounts for 80% of fishing trawlers having external beneficial ownership. But we need to demand that as part of our broader accountability of countries, and to point out, as much as we are demanding the leadership of said countries in addressing piracy, how they are addressing some of these human-centered issues as well. So this is one of the dimensions of the emphasis that I sought to provide, so that we don't really limit it as we have done from resolution 2018 to now piracy. As I said, the attempt has been made in the preamble in this resolution, but beyond that, it hasn't deepened that aspect. Of course, I can understand, because at times it is seen as a national sensitive issue, but hey, we must look at the maritime commons as a whole. And if we are addressing them, we must factually address all the concerns.
Thanks very much. I want to turn to Ambassador Negm, because as a former representative of one of these organizations that has been instrumental in advancing the notion of African maritime security, the African Union often found itself either in direct or at least perceived conflict with some of the other initiatives that have been brought about either within the regions or by external actors. And I'd be curious to hear your perspective on how we actually go about this notion of coordination of all these efforts, because it is a very diverse field of actors now that have taken an interest in Gulf of Guinea maritime security. And it is a very challenging job to get them all aligned and moving in the same direction. So, Madam Ambassador, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aydin. Actually, I was thinking, like, when you were speaking, that the best focal point will be the Gulf of Guinea Secretariat. And they should take the lead in this kind of coordination. All of us work, all of us want to assist, all of us try an attempt to bring about either strategies or to go bilaterally to some of the countries in the Gulf of Guinea in order to assist them in countering all the crimes that are taking place at sea. But I do believe that we need to strengthen that institution and work with them. Because in relation to the African Union, we have already a mechanism now trying to coordinate with our regional economic communities, which include the ECOWAS, ECAS, and so on, where the Gulf of Guinea states are members together with the African Union. But I do believe that now, because as you just mentioned, we do have players from outside of the regions of Africa. And I do believe the cooperation with them is also very important to make sure things evolve to a better level than we are now when it comes to not only the security aspects, but also with like the root causes or the underlying causes in relation to socioeconomic reasons. So I do believe the Secretariat of the Gulf of Guinea should take over this type of coordination, and we should all assist them in doing so. Like if they need some of our expertise to assist in this effort to bring all these stakeholders around the table in one room, we should assist them in doing so. Thank you so much.
Let me ask a direct follow-up, and please forgive the question. Who exactly do you mean by the Gulf of Guinea Secretariat? Because given the number of entities that we have now who share the title of Gulf of Guinea, that actually is kind of a difficult question to answer. Do you mean the Gulf of Guinea Commission? Do you mean the Interregional Coordination Center in Yaoundé? Do you mean the Secretariat of ECOWAS, ECAS, and the Gulf of Guinea Commission that oversee the Interregional Coordination Center? Or do you mean someone else? Over to you.
No, I do mean the Gulf of Guinea Commission, because that is part and parcel of its role. And all the other institutions establish different commissions, different bodies to assist the Gulf of Guinea states and the Gulf of Guinea Commission. So in my mind was the Gulf of Guinea Commission, because that's its mandate. So to assist it in carrying out its mandate, we should all ask it to coordinate the efforts. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and I appreciate that clarification. I'd be curious if any of the others, either from this panel or the next, want to comment on that, because as we are looking for practical recommendations to come out of this, this is one that is being put forward. Does anyone have a comment on the practicality of that?
Hello.
Go ahead, Dr. Peterside. I'll introduce you later, but happy to have your voice in this conversation.
Thank you very much. There are two dimensions to this. The first is that a number of Gulf of Guinea states do not have the operational capacity to secure their waters. And so when you talk about regional cooperation, I don't think that some states of the Gulf of Guinea will provide that capacity for other states. They can work together, but the primary responsibility of securing the waters of any particular state is that of the state. The other dimension is the regional collaboration mechanism. And the most potent one is the Yaoundé architecture. Unfortunately, whereas it is subscribed to by the leaders of both ECOWAS and ECAS, and I mean the leaders of the West African states and the Central African states, the legal framework itself is not binding. And so states still prefer to enter into bilateral relations or multilateral relations. And so the emphasis is not on the workability of the Yaoundé architecture. And the architecture itself needs to be reviewed and made more practical in line with what both Dr. Kamal-Deen said and Dr. Assis. I don't believe that in its current shape and form, it will achieve the desired objective. And much later, you'll find out that that's why Nigeria, and unfortunately, this is not fair, but I can say it, it's generally perceived that Nigeria is the center of piracy attacks in the region, or that most piracy attacks emanate from Nigeria. I can say I'm Nigerian, so I'm not going to be so sensitive that I cannot say it. Nigeria decided that to save her economy and trade in that region, to take the bull by the horn, it empaneled the Deep Blue project under my watch at the time. It decided to put the legal framework in place, the anti-piracy law, with the support from UNODC. It decided to strengthen its naval capabilities, and still at the same time open and willing to collaborate with others. Example is shade and other things Nigeria has done. Because Nigeria realized that sister states of the Gulf of Guinea do not necessarily have the capability. And so if we wait for them, if we wait for that cooperation, not much can be achieved. So in two dimensions, one, how do we strengthen the capacity and capabilities of the individual Gulf of Guinea states? That will now dovetail to strengthening the regional mechanism. If we strengthen the regional mechanism without strengthening the capabilities and capacities, the legal framework of the individual states, we will not achieve much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's a really helpful contribution. Ife, I know you're on the next panel, but I want to give you the floor as well, because I know you have something important to share with us.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much. I have really enjoyed listening to you, and I was literally taking notes when you were all talking. I just wanted to re-echo a lot of the points that has been made in relation to, what next, what has to be done differently, and the reality, without having to maybe say too much of what I would say during my own talk, is that the onus of providing security at sea for the respective countries in the region lie in those countries, or lie with those countries, which is why a more regional collaborative arrangement is a way forward, rather than, sort of selling off that responsibility to outside entities. Of course, I know that this was not what a lot of people, especially the shipping industry, wanted. The nature of the resolution of the United Nations, wherein they called on the region to actually do this themselves. And I want to specifically highlight an excerpt from the resolution itself. It said, the UN also urged Gulf of Guinea states to take prompt action at national and regional levels with the support of the international community when requested by the state concerned. And this is absolutely important, especially if we, without rehashing again how the incident with the Danish vessel Aydin, and literally how it almost disrupted the peace, if I can put it that way. And that is why personally, as an observer, as a researcher, I feel that caveat was necessary and is necessary, because it reiterates the point that even though we as an entity, or I as a state, recognize that I have a limitation, if you want to support me, you need to work with me so that we can talk about the terms of that support rather than imposing yourselves. And so I saw a question where someone talked about a country like Sao Tome and Principe. Yes, there are limitations in terms of how they can implement some of those things we've talked about, which is why the next step would then be for the UN through the Security Council and its members to then table out how exactly do you expect regional states to do these things? What kind of support is going to be in place to help them achieve this big responsibility you've given to them? Because the reality is, even if we decided to go the Somali-styled route, we have seen in recent times that when push comes to shove, nation states, external actors will prioritize their respective interests. We saw this at the onset of COVID, how they record their vessels, and literally the Gulf of Guinea state. And thankfully at that time, they've really, started this whole idea of cooperation. And so they were able to, at least maybe not as efficient as they could, because they don't have the tools, or some of them do not have the tools, but they were able to fill some of the gaps. We also saw this with the recent, again, the deployment of the Danish vessel, which was supposed to stay until April this year, but it left in February. Why? Because, well, there are other priorities, the war in Ukraine. So the reality is that I want to reiterate, we have to find a solution wherein the region can be able to collaborate between each other, which is what they are doing. And then the international community can bring in their support. And even when that support requires presence, the terms of that presence would have to be detailed or agreed with the countries or naval personnel of those countries working with the personnel of the international actors, rather than seeing a complete Somali-style response. Because why? It is not in the interest of sustainable security, because if you have other people do the job for you, how do you improve the system when the people goes away? I thought it's very important for me to highlight this now that the question is asked, and I hope I'll be able to add more during our session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ife Okofi-Yarwood. We will be introducing you properly in just a little bit, but I really appreciate that contribution. Madam Ambassador, I think you have your hand up next, and then I want to get to George Mangos after that.
Thank you very much. Actually, I just wanted to comment on few things that were just said. When we speak about the individual capabilities, we can see that in most of Africa, not only in the Gulf of Guinea. And we know that the small states in the Gulf of Guinea will not be able to do it alone. And that's why the resolution itself stressed on international cooperation. And we have witnessed the lower level of illicit activities because of the international cooperation. So let's be very clear about that. One major element we have to identify here, that the primary responsibility of the maintenance of peace and security internationally is the United Nations. That is we cannot argue that. But now, because of everything that's happening around the world, let me here put my political hat and say that basically we have to be really looking at what the Security Council is willing to do at this point in time. And if they are not, even the resolution is not adopted under Chapter 7. So this is something we have also to note. And that is why when, actually what Dr. Effie said is close to what I said, because the responsibility lies within the states of the Gulf of Guinea, and they are the ones who established the commission in order to take care of the security in the Gulf. They can coordinate with everybody. We have now fragmentation of rules and fragmentation of bodies dealing with the same issue. So in order to make sure that we bring them together, and I could have suggested the UN, the AU, ECOWAS, ECAS, but all the other bodies you've just mentioned, like the OND Secretariat. But the whole thing is, we have a commission established specifically for this. So if we are able to work with them, rather than invent something extra and new that will make it more difficult to coordinate, maybe that will be easier. At the same time, if it comes from outside of the region, you know how sensitive we are, and we will think it's being imposed on us rather than we are welcoming it, as Dr. Effie said, per our request. So I just wanted to voice that out. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really helpful, channel of recommendations that really can be taken forward. I want to turn though to George Mangos and ask a very specific question. Over the last decade, how many times have you been reached out to for your views on how to address some of these issues as a ship owner, in terms of having to actually go into an area that, whether by truth or by narrative, is a real concern for piracy?
Directly, zero. I would say indirectly, that would be via the war clubs. So I think the war clubs, let's say, have acted as an intermediary between ourselves as ship owners and of course the security services. I think that's the most direct answer I can give you.
Well, no, and I think that's a really important piece, is that you know, many I think both naval officers and maritime administrators are in the awkward position of having to try to create a situation where the environment is safe for shipping, it's safe for fishing, it's safe for all these maritime activities that we want and need. But we don't necessarily understand what those who engage in shipping, in fishing, in other activities in the maritime space want and need. And so, you know, this is partly why I think having you in this conversation is so important, because we do not often have everybody at the table. And so to Asisha's point about identifying actors and creating more conversations like this, I think we do need to come up with ways to more effectively bring everyone around to coordinate not only you know, efforts, but to actually harness better understanding. And I think the mutual listening is really quite important. One of the questions that was posed in the chat mentioned that Madam Ambassador, you had said you know, oil coming out of Nigeria was very you know, important for the energy crisis, and they brought up, well, what about LNG, liquefied natural gas, that is coming not only out of Nigeria, but Angola, and in the future, Senegal. And I would add that oil also comes from a number of other states, including Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Ghana, and others. And so we have really important global energy dynamics taking place within the waters of many of these states. And so it is a strange tension, because on the one hand, many of us are talking about the need for national level action, but to solve problems that are being faced by virtue of the globalization of activities that are coming out of those individual states. And so how do we balance the tension of needs of actors that are sitting, you know, in Greece, in Hamburg, in other parts of the world, and yet sending their ships, their people, because ultimately this is not about a vessel, it's about the people who are on the vessel, into areas where they cannot be certain about the security of the space. And so the question for everyone really is whether it is Deep Blue and Falcon Eye, which have been very successful in at least temporarily changing the risk reward calculus, how do we go further collectively to make sure that we are respecting the sovereignty and the desires and needs of the national states, but at the same time make sure that we are including the voices of all those who need to be heard. So I welcome any thoughts on that sort of process, because we really don't have, you know, we have shade, but those voices tend to be quite limited. We have you know, the fog, but those are state voices. We have all these different things, but really everyone isn't in the conversation yet. So how do we get there?
If I may just direct a question to Dr. Peterside, which, as you said, Deep Blue, it started under your tenure, and you know, to my uneducated and eyes, let's say, causation correlation, it seems to have been an extremely critical piece of the, at least to my eyes, of the improving security picture. And it seems to be quite a fundamental building block, let's say, for everything else that may come afterwards. So to that extent, I mean, is Deep Blue something that is going to be let's say, a perpetual activity, or is it, let's say, an invitation for other people to join and in this effort and support it in whichever way they can?
All right, thank you, Mr. George. It is both. It is designed to be a perpetual activity and at the same time a collaborative effort. And now it's good to understand the objective of the Deep Blue project. One is to improve situational awareness, and that is being achieved. So the Deep Blue project and Falcon Eye of the Nigerian Navy is designed to increase situational awareness. And if you have a bird's eye view of the entire maritime space in Nigeria and beyond, you now know that it's one leg of the problem solved. The second challenge is the capacity to interdict these criminals. Now, the second leg of the Deep Blue project is acquisition and deployment of assets, because we realize along the line that the capacity to chase these criminals and arrest, interdict them and prosecute them is a challenge. It's a major gap we identified. So the Deep Blue project embarked on the acquisition of more assets to support the Nigerian Navy, assets that will be dedicated to maritime security specifically. So that's the second leg of the Deep Blue project. Now, the third leg of the Deep Blue project is the training of personnel. We realize that the naval personnel in Nigeria are not specifically trained for maritime security. They are specifically trained to protect our territorial integrity. But now you need to understand maritime laws. You need to understand the nature of commercial shipping for you to get involved in maritime security. So they're specifically trained for that. There's a detachment of the military that is specifically trained for that. Then we also understand the relationship between what is happening onshore and what is happening offshore. The Deep Blue project tried to bridge that gap between what is happening offshore and onshore. But finally, the issue of coordination between the actors internally in Nigeria. Now, the naval forces, the Air Force, the Marine Police, the maritime agencies, and all of that. So the Deep Blue project provides some level of coordination. Now, but in addition to that, it's got some cooperation too and coordination with the international community through the shared platform. So the Deep Blue project is doing all of that. Now, for me, that's a model of what seems to be working. There are a lot of gaps, and I clearly say so. It was conceived under my tenure, under my watch, and I was involved in the conception from beginning to the end, up to the execution. So I know that there are a lot of gaps. I believe that the international community or a lot of international actors can help address those gaps, whether in the area of training, whether in the area of strengthening of assets, maybe acquisition of assets, and in many other areas, in training, in terms of evidence gathering, because now prosecution is a very important leg of fighting piracy. One reason why piracy seems to have thrived in Nigeria is that even when these guys are arrested, they go scot-free. But now there's a law in place and we've had successful prosecution. So for me, these are my thoughts on how the Deep Blue project is progressing.
Thank you very much. And I think, I would certainly argue, having looked at not only the figures, but a lot of the trajectories, there are a confluence of factors that have changed the conditions for pirates and has contributed to this downturn. One of them is this procurement and development of Deep Blue. Another is an increase in prosecutions, both in Nigeria under the Suppression of Piracy and Other Maritime Offenses Act, the SPOMO Act, as well as prosecutions in other countries that have seen piracy incidents. And that is also supported by the perpetual activity now of the Yaoundé architecture and the coordination that comes from even just communicating what's going on. And there's a lot more mutual support. But we do have this increased presence of external actors, not just in the initiative, but physically on the waters. And I want to just turn to the Danish frigate incident, because I'm not sure everybody is familiar with it. And Kamal, if you are still on with us, I was wondering if you could just bring that up since you first mentioned it, to tell us what happened and why that has become such an important flashpoint for some of these discussions. Because I will tell you, having witnessed both the discussions inside of the Gulf of Guinea and among Gulf of Guinea actors and citizens versus the coverage of it in the media in Europe and North America, they sound like two completely different incidents. And that is, I think, a really important point to bring out, is that many of us base our assessments on the narratives that are coming out of the news that we read. And the same incident was labeled a great counter-piracy success by a Danish frigate on the one hand, and a tragedy in which a foreign European vessel killed 4 Nigerian nationals and maimed another in the local news. And so, Kamal, are you still with us?
He's muted.
He seems to be there, but if he may be back in session. So I will just turn to anyone who's willing to speak to that issue, because I think it's really important, particularly sitting here in Europe, sitting here in NATO, to understand that how we perceive a success may actually be perceived as a failure somewhere else. And so would anyone be willing to speak to that?
Well, I'll just make brief comments about the, again, it's an issue that we'll tackle in our next section. I'll just point out 3 things. The Esbern incident is unfortunate, but again, it echoes the sovereignty of the Gulf of Guinea nations and their primary responsibility to secure their waters. Going forward, one big lesson I think that would have taught all of us, or we should have learned, is the need to work with the different states of the Gulf of Guinea. Now, no matter the intervention we make, it will not be adequate and it will not get to the root of the matter. In the Esbern incident, there are many states in the Gulf of Guinea. I don't want to say many states, at least Nigeria, Senegal, I guess Liberia, I think Togo, Cape Verde. I don't know what the state in Ghana right now. I know that Ghana was about developing their own anti-piracy law. I don't know what the state now. Now, there are states with laws to prosecute suspected pirates. The appropriate thing would have been to hand over these chaps to any of those states for them to be prosecuted. Now, the other thing is the degree of response to the threat. Is it worthwhile? And it raises a lot of issues. You know, I think that we should rather work with the Gulf of Guinea states, and Dr. Kafoya Wood has made that point, Dr. Kamal-Deen had made that point, and I think that most speakers have made that point, the need for the international community and other actors to work with the Gulf of Guinea states. And that even for us to establish our presence in their waters, they need to be put on notice. They need, now if you read the text of the current UN resolution, it says that you should cooperate with the states, give them support when they so request. And I can extend it that for you to give them support, you need to get them on the table, you need to get them involved. That seems to be missing link. And so we send our naval ships to their waters without taking them into confidence, without collaborating with them. It will be counterproductive. And so I believe that the Esbern incident must have taught us a lot of lessons on all sides. For the Gulf of Guinea states to establish their sovereignty and take responsibility and be held accountable. Then for the multilateral partners to work with the Gulf of Guinea states is key, and not just for us to intervene. And some Gulf of Guinea states might be reluctant, but I think that many are willing to cooperate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will try to speak more directly into the microphone, as I understand that some of you have had trouble hearing me, and I hope this is better. But I do think that the Danish incident brings out a number of things, as you say, including the need to think about the end state. And the end state in any kind of maritime law enforcement, all of this is fundamentally a law enforcement activity, needs to be some kind of legal finish. And if there is no consideration for who has the capacity and the legal authority to bring about that legal finish, it is a poorly planned operation to begin with. And so we need to really make sure that we have the relationships in place to ensure that the risk-reward calculus is not only changed through operations on the water, but through activities in the courtrooms and other administrative procedures that come from it. Now, Ambassador, I know your hand is up. I want to just emphasize some of the questions that have been posed in the chat because I think they're worth trying to address. Now, some of them will be addressed in the next panel, but before we lose potentially some of the speakers from this first panel, I want to give them the opportunity to speak to these. One of them mentioned, and this is sort of to George Mangos's comment, the SHADE, and that shared awareness and deconfliction exercise that has now been stood up as sort of a next iteration of the same mechanism that first started in Bahrain to deal with counter-piracy coordination in the Horn of Africa, and then was adopted in a similar fashion in the Mediterranean to deal with the counter-migration efforts of the trans-Mediterranean route, and then the now adaptation of it for a Gulf of Guinea context. I think what I would just point out to that, and curious to hear anybody else's voices, is that I have heard many actors in the Gulf of Guinea complain not that the industry isn't well represented at that one, but that actually the Gulf of Guinea, as a wider group of states and not just Nigeria, is not as well represented. And so that there may be, yes, some representation from the Yaoundé architecture, but many of the states are perhaps not as well included in that one. And so wherever the balance may be, I think we need to make sure that everyone has a channel to feel like their voice can be part of the question, part of the conversation. And I'd encourage any comments on that. The second question was on multinational and multi-mission operations. Counter-piracy is in some ways easy because piracy is a crime of universal jurisdiction. That means that any navy outside of the territorial sea of a state can engage in counter-piracy operations. Once we get to anything else, be it human trafficking, even arms trafficking, drug trafficking, the smuggling of fuel, and illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, as well as other fisheries crimes, we end up in a much more difficult position because those are fundamentally issues of national jurisdiction. And so the question is, when we have multi-mission operations, how can we balance these different challenges? Because this Security Council resolution does talk about piracy, but it also talks about transnational organized crime. How can we balance those? And finally, how can we understand better the links between these maritime offenses and terrorism? And I'll stop with those three questions. There's one more that I will pose afterwards, but those three questions are on the table for anyone who wants to address them. Ambassador, since your hand is already up, I will turn to you first.
Thank you very much. I would just want to highlight one thing, because this has been mentioned in many seminars and webinars now in relation to maritime security, the issue of jurisdictional gaps. I would say there is no jurisdictional gap, even when we are speaking about the multilateral and multinational operations, as you mentioned, because all the transnational crimes are prosecutable, and prosecutable in the national jurisdiction and in sometimes as international crimes. The whole thing is, again, as I mentioned in my very first remarks, is the ability and the willingness of states, because simply we have rules based on UNCLOS. When we are on the high seas, who will prosecute? And if we speak about the ports, the flag state and the nationals themselves, which leaves no jurisdictional gap if we follow the rules properly. The problem is today that states, because either they are not able to or unwilling to politically to take over the prosecutions. We have one or two in Togo and Nigeria were very successful, and that is why we started to have better responses. But simply, this is one thing we have to think of when we speak about different nationalities in one operation. At the end of the day, who arrested the perpetrators? It's the one who will have the jurisdiction, who will transfer, and who will have, of course, the ability, and because this costs money in order to prosecute the perpetrators. So this is crucial if we speak about these issues. When we speak about the issue unrequested, this is, by the way, one major issue in relation to the international cooperation in general. You will find in all the work of the United Nations saying, if invited, upon invitation, upon request. So this issue of the Danish vessel or others, if they are done in collaboration with the states, and believe me, a lot of states are willing to cooperate with the international community because they don't have enough capacity, they realize it, and they want to enhance their capacity. We cannot shy away from saying this. I've seen that personally in Cutlass Express with the AFRICOM and the Eastern Navies of Africa. So I know they are willing to cooperate, but at the same time, do not cooperate in the format that you are training people on machines that they don't have. This is so also important. So it doesn't make sense that you bring navies to train them on naval vessels that do not exist in the navies. When it comes to migration, because I'm handling migration right now in the observatory, I just want to mention one thing in relation to the routes of migration, because now with the curve of the routes of migration from north of Africa, definitely you will have a rise of different routes and maybe slavery and trade in relation to human beings in other parts of Africa, especially those who are closer to the Mediterranean, because at the end of the day, these are routes will bring them to the Mediterranean. So this is something we have to take into consideration while speaking about different crimes happening at sea. The last thing I will say is that in relation to your question, in relation to the links between maritime offenses and terrorism. I handled terrorism before, and yes, I mentioned the proceeds of the crimes. We have, of course, terrorism at sea, because that exists, but at the same time, the link itself exists when we speak about the proceeds of the crimes that are taking place at sea, because definitely some of the illicit activities in relation to the oil and gas and whatever taking place, for example, in the waters of Nigeria, is taken to be used in the terrorism in parts of Nigeria by Boko Haram and others. So we have to, again, as I said at the beginning, there is no borders to these crimes, and there is always a link between these crimes, as long as they are transnational. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I actually teach a session or a segment on maritime terrorism at the U.S. Naval War College. And I would completely agree with you, but I would also offer up that terrorist organizations sometimes use maritime routes not only for their own financing, but for creating the logistics and sustainment chains they need in order to be able to operate. And many things that they may do in the maritime space may seem completely benign, but is actually the foundation of something far more sinister than most of us would even like to consider. So I open the floor to anyone else who wants to tackle any of those 4 questions posed, or 3 questions earlier posed, and particularly offer up to the 4 speakers from this first panel before we wrap up and take a quick break before the next panel.
If I may, sorry, just interject just with one question. And again, you know, forgive my ignorance in these things, but I felt it might be interesting also to sort of tie in with NATO. Given, let's say, the redrawing of the global energy map following the war in the Ukraine, and the potential for malign influence, so to speak, to try and disrupt the energy exports from West Africa by interference on land and the knock-on at sea. To the extent that obviously that you're able to sort of speak about it, my question would be what NATO assets are in place in order, let's say, to anticipate such actions, and what potentially would be NATO's role in the Gulf of Guinea to assist the littoral states.
Well, I'll first turn to any of the panelists who may want to speak on that. Does anyone want to take a stab?
I would just say, if requested.
A very important addition. I think that is a great comment. I think
a true ambassador, excellent reply.
I think one of the things that we are trying to do here today is actually ascertain if there is not only a need, but an interest in NATO involvement and what that might look like. I think we aren't at the position of being able to say what assets are readily deployable, but we may be able to get to the point in the next panel of discussing where knowledge transfer, assistance and support from not only the counter-piracy mission that occurred in East Africa, but from operations as a multinational force that has a lot of countries pulling in a lot of different directions, a lot of different sizes, a lot of different economies, might be helpful in sharing knowledge, insights, and ultimately some of the military and security know-how that it has developed over the decades. And so that will be part of our discussion in the next panel. I want to give, we're going to take a quick break here for about 10 minutes, but I want to give the panelists from this first excellent, exceptional panel the opportunity to say any closing words before we turn over. And as was the case in this first instance, you will have the opportunity to chime in on the Q&A in the second panel's discussion session. But I'll start with Ambassador Negm. Would you care to share any final thoughts?
I would just say that now I think we have already witnessed development in the Gulf of Guinea, and we would like to draw lessons learned from this drop in order not to repeat it again. We have spoken about the enhancement of capacities of the countries, the legal framework and everything in relation to international cooperation. But I think now with this drop in piracy and armed robbery and different illicit activities in the Gulf of Guinea, we have to draw the lessons learned from this experience to keep following it and even apply it in other regions in the, not only of course in Africa, but across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is extremely important. Is Dr. Ashish Malakia still online? We may have lost him. Is Dr. Kamal-Deen Ali still online? Okay, George Mangos, final word.
To thank you. I think it was, I very much appreciate being allowed, let's say, to be involved in this. I think it's, like I said to you, I think it's a tremendous learning experience for us. And we have a great deal to learn from all of you. We have a great deal to learn from the struggles that you guys have to do, because, you know, we see only the results. We don't see the effort that has to go into it. I think that that's very worth communicating to the international community of shipping. And that's it. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the speakers. We're going to take a very short break just to fill up cups and get ourselves sorted and ready for a more direct discussion of the implementation of this resolution. I know that there were a couple of questions posed in the Q&A that I have held on to for the next session, as they may be better posed to the second group of speakers. So I will ask us all to be back in the next 10 minutes or so for restarting this discussion. And I understand that we can't all be together for this entire session, but we'll start off the next panel with Ife Okafor Yarwood in just about 10 minutes. So thanks very much, and a quick break. All right, everyone, welcome back, and welcome in particular to our next group of panelists, and I'm delighted to introduce them. We have a really great group. You've already heard from some of them, and I think this next discussion will really start helping us target recommendations of how to move forward, because what we want to focus on now is the actual implementation of this UN Security Council resolution, and what that will actually mean, not just for the Gulf of Guinea states, but whether international partners have specific roles and what those roles could be, and in particular, what role might NATO play. So we're going to reverse the originally intended order a little bit to accommodate schedules, and it's going to be my very profound honor to introduce someone you've already heard from a few times earlier Dr. Ife Okafor-Yarwood. She is a professor at the University of St. Andrews and has really established a leading voice in terms of not just academic research, but really evidence-based research on how to understand and make sense of not just what is happening in the Gulf of Guinea, but how to do something to change that context. The second speaker will be Rear Admiral Narciso Jr. He is the director of the Interregional Coordination Center in Yaoundé. We have already heard somewhat about the architecture of security cooperation. And then we will third hear from Dr. Dakuko Peterside, who has also been a fantastic participant so far in our discussion. He's the former Director General of NAMASA, the Nigerian Maritime Administration that has been a center point for the discussions of how to combat piracy for many years now. And he is, as you heard previously, responsible for some of the initiatives that today are really starting to have a tremendous impact on the security situation. And finally, rounding out our panel will be Captain Loic Maduma, retired Deputy Chief of Naval Staff of Gabon, but furthermore, one of the real, we're hearing some unstable internet connection, so I hope you can all hear me. Captain Loic Maduma is one of the real godfathers of this architecture. He was one of the brains behind much of what has happened in the region to develop security cooperation, and he can speak on a whole lot of different initiatives, having been the institutional memory behind them. So I will stop those introductions there and turn the floor to Ife. Dr. Ife Okafor-Yarwood, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much to NATO Hub for the invitation. I'm going to try not to rehash some of the things that's already been said by the previous panel or some of the issues that is raised, to go straight to the point by noting that, of course, as someone that researches in this topic, on this topic, and engages with policymakers and implementers and people that are actually impacted by some of the security threats in the region that we're discussing, I do have my reservations about the UN resolution 2034, especially in relation to how it promulgates this elitist nature of maritime security, wherein a particular type of threat is centered, and whilst other threats are sort of piggybacked, if we can put it that way. And this conversation, or should I say this elitist narrative, helps me to then talk about the relationship between what threats the global community seems to sort of have interest in versus the threats that actually is of the interest of the regional population or the states in the region. And these align with some of the points that's already been made by the previous speakers, but then this is of course not what I'm going to be talking about. But aside from that point of disagreement, I also want to say that I do agree with then some of the provisions of the resolution in the way that in particular it calls on the states in the region to take the lead and then emphasize that external actors can support when invited or when states make a request. And this obviously allows then for a scenario where we're able to avoid conflicts and wherein the states can work with external actors that are supporting them with clarity on what kind of support we need from you. And what this would do is obviously avoid the scenario of replication and waste of resources. And it is from this point that I want to say that I do agree with the UN resolution and the provisions from that aspect. And then I want to then make a point, like raise 3 points as to why I agree with this and why it is the way forward or the right decision to make. First of all, the region taking the lead provides an opportunity for regional states, despite who currently, of course, might have limited capacity in certain areas, be it in relation to assets, be it in relation to wherewithal or funding and technological know-how, but it allows them to then develop those limitations or develop these areas where they do currently have limitations. It also allows states to be able to lead the way, especially when external actors might not necessarily have the same priority as those that are in the region. And I've already highlighted this when I made my contribution earlier when the question was raised. And I gave 2 examples in relation to why we should not sort of arrogate or sort of move the responsibility of security at sea, regardless of limitations of countries in the region, to external actors for the two reasons I mentioned. How at the height of COVID, they left because, well, there are other priorities and national security interest, which does not necessarily relate with what was going on at the time. And secondly, I also give the example of the Aydin snare, wherein despite the whole idea that, oh, we're coming to help the region because of limited capacities, they also found the need to leave. And then what happens to that help at the time that you were leaving the region, if really that support was something that is very important and paramount to the very security of the region? And these reasons are just two of the most important reasons I feel. But importantly, and I think this, it might seem controversial, but it also, it's what being, I mean, it's worth saying, even though we've seen a different direction to it in relation to the Gulf of Aden, but primarily that emphasis on when requested is very important, especially when we look at historically, the last time the Europeans unilaterally took a decision to send their ships to the region or to the continent, it resulted in the continent and many people from the continent ending up in chains. And of course, this talks about the issue of slavery and colonialism that we witnessed before. It therefore would be folly for anyone not to talk about those colonial links and the potential implications of making a unilateral decision without necessarily engaging the region. Because at the end of the day, states would almost always seek to protect their respective national interests. And this is why it's very important, the emphasis on when invited. And then moving on, what then is the region doing? What has the region done in the past, and what are they doing currently to at least show that they are able to do something differently? And this is where it's important for us to highlight the progress that has been made with the Yaoundé, since the Yaoundé agreement, which of course we have to acknowledge that the first 2 UN resolutions was something that actually encouraged states to take further steps to do something about it. We can talk about the operationalization of the CRESMAX, for instance, and CRESMA, these are the Regional Center for Maritime Security. We can talk about the operationalization of the Zone D, Zone E, Zone F, which we've already talked about in part, and most recently the headquarter agreement for Zone G, which is going to be stationed in Praia, Cabo Verde, was signed. These are just some of the positive things that are happening. I want to also emphasize at this point that some of these positive things are happening because of the support of international actors like the European Union and other international entities, which is very important in highlighting that when countries and their external actors work together, you would actually end up having more productive outcome than when they work against each other or when they do not collaborate with each other. And another evidence that shows us that the region is learning lessons from previous mistakes, and even to that extent is learning lessons from the mistake from their partners. And I want to emphasize this mistake from the partners in relation to the Aydin snare incident again, and how it actually motivated ECOWAS region in particular to then think about ways, and this also responds directly to the call by the UN resolution 2634 to do more, to be able to prosecute criminals, for instance. And we see then in August, with the support of SWAIN's program, which is also funded by the European Union and the UNODC, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, that the ECOWAS countries were able to, the heads of states of ECOWAS member states were able to adopt a supplementary act for the transfer of piracy suspects and the associated property. Therefore, the excuse that, oh, this country do not have a working legal framework for maritime piracy, for instance, would no longer work, because at least even if country A, for instance, Ghana does not currently have that provision, if pirates are captured, there's now a provision in place to ensure that the pirates can be moved from a country like Ghana to Nigeria or Togo that have that provision in place. And these are positive things that is happening at the regional level. We also see increased information sharing and the role that it plays in terms of the progress that is being made, in terms of the progress that is being made, in terms of the progress that is being made by countries in the region in terms of internet information sharing. And we see, for instance, and not just in information sharing, but also interagency cooperation and collaboration. We see the importance of this information sharing with the capture of the pirates that kidnapped crews of Heilung Feng 11 in 2020. We also see the importance of information sharing in relation to the capture of the heroic Aydin in August 2022, with the cooperation and collaboration between Nigerian Navy and that of Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea. This was a vessel that was actually coming into Nigeria to steal oil or sort of bunker oil illegally. We also see, in relation to information sharing, specifically the role that IARIS is playing in relation to the capture of an Egyptian flag vessel that was engaged in illegal fishing. Again, these are things that sort of highlight some of the positive things that are happening that has been supported by either international actors and also highlights that cooperation or the positive outcomes of cooperation and collaboration. We also see that there is a lot of discussion around piloting maritime cooperation between countries in the Gulf of Guinea generally, and this was discussed extensively at the 65th anniversary of the Nigerian Navy in May. There are other aspects of regional cooperation that aligns with the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, for instance, and the Lomé Charter. For instance, currently under discussion is the bilateral military commission between Nigeria and Sao Tome and Principe, which is currently in formation. Again, this sort of highlights that countries in the region are aware that there are smaller countries that would need more support, and they are doing what they can to actually provide such support. Nigeria and Equatorial Guinea also have this combined maritime police and security patrol committee, and it was actually this that was evoked that helped with the capture of heroic Aydin when it went to Equatorial Guinea in August this year. We also had joint patrol by Cameroon and Equatorial Guinea. However, challenges remain, as we have noted, with the previous session and some of the questions that came in. There are still so many challenges. And in discussing this challenge, there are also responses or solutions in terms of what needs to be done differently. For instance, when it comes to international partners, there is no arguing that we need their support or the region need their support, be it financial, be it in forms of asset, be it in form of education and training, be it in form of collaboration and cooperation. But importantly, those outcomes or the way or the terms of this support needs to be something that is agreed with the region. And I'll give an example. International partners specifically need to work with the region to devise their own regional strategies for the region. For instance, there is still a need for clarity on the EU entry point or entry port for the CMP, since that is still active until 2024. It's still not clear, at least from this observer that is speaking to you now. It is still not clear, and absolutely to avoid a scenario where we have another Esbensner, wherein countries then are not willing to maybe cooperate at that point because you're already there before agreeing on something with them. It is important there is clarity around the entry port for the CMP, since we still have it in place. Countries in the region would also need assets. They would also need technology. They would also need so many things. For instance, in relation to subscription fee, we talked about IARIS, and IARIS would soon be handed over to the region, but there are discussions around who would actually be paying for these subscription fees. Of course, the international community would not be expected to do everything, but there is need for clarity around what would the implementation of this UN resolution entail, and what kind of support would the UN be able to offer to the region to help them implement these things. There's also need for radar in the coastal areas to help with optimum utilization of the limited assets that is in place, so that at least people or countries that have the asset can be able to ascertain what is happening at sea before deploying, which would obviously reduce wastage. We've also talked about at the international level or external actors level, the need for coordination to ensure that there's no replication around what they are implementing in the region, for instance. I want to conclude because I'm seeing that, you're looking at the time and I don't want to sort of go over my time, but I want to note one thing, that so long as we're discussing maritime security issues and emphasis here on on piracy and robbery at sea, whilst I do agree that it is practically impossible for us to get to the point where there's a sustainable solution to piracy and robbery at sea without addressing issues relating to livelihoods. And this includes, of course, addressing the threats to depleting fish stock, addressing IUU fishing, addressing the overexploitation of already overexploited resources and issues like that. But in relation to solving the problem of piracy and robbery at sea, regardless of how we think that the region might have limited resources or do not have that limited resources, the reality is that coming from the external actors, they have to come from a position of, we recognize that you have this problem. We recognize that you have these limitations. How can we help? Rather than from a position of, we know you have this problem, this is what we're going to do. And I hope that this is something that NATO, for their part, who clearly can have an important role to play in supporting the region, will be asking themselves, especially when it has to do with how they can help the region to have a more sustainable maritime security result, especially in relation to continued reduction in piracy as we've seen it now. And thank you so much for listening, and I hope I can be able to answer questions later.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ihipe. This is a question that I would have waited to ask you, but I want to make sure we don't lose this thread because it is so important. You've emphasized it. Some of the other speakers in the previous panel emphasized it. When requested is such an important part of this resolution, and it is very crucial to the success or failure of the implementation of it. And my question is to you. Do external actors wait, or do they actually come forward with proposals or offers and see what actually is desired? Because I know that there are a lot of external actors who are perhaps not well known or not well understood, because you even mentioned NATO. What could NATO bring to the table? Well, maybe we don't actually have that off the top of our heads right now, but maybe NATO could come up with an offering and say, this is what we could offer. Is it of interest? Or should NATO be waiting to hear directly from the Gulf of Guinea? Over.
I mean, absolutely not. They shouldn't wait. I mean, the good thing about the region is that there are already like focal points or central people, central agencies that you can engage with to understand how you can actually maybe get to the main person or main representatives that work in different areas. We have the ICC here, for example. We also have the GGC, the Gulf of Guinea Commission, who the ambassador mentioned earlier. We have so many actors that we can approach. So it's not a case of waiting, but because you have the resources, for instance, what NATO can do is to review the Yaoundé agreement, for instance, to see how their vision for the region might align with the provisions or the vision of the region. This makes it easier. And then when you come to the region to discuss, it's basically a case of ticking boxes because, oh, wow, it aligns. So how do we do this, right? Another thing that is actually worth saying, because in the first session we had George, and I'm so happy that George is here, is that even with the first resolution, the UN talks about what the region have to do, and the region have worked hard to improve information sharing. The region have absolutely done a lot and is continuing to do a lot. But it still remains practically impractical that vessels operating in the region that expect the region to be more effective in providing security would not recognize the region as a trustworthy first point of contact when there is an incident at sea. They would rather call someone that is somewhere in France, for instance, M.Gog or somewhere else, right? And then they would then relay it back to the region, to which by the time the region gets the information, of course, it's possible the criminals might have absconded and the region is not able to act effectively. So this also goes two ways. There's a need for those that are willing and able to support the region to support in that way. For the shipping community, there's also a need for them to recognize, regardless of what differences, regardless of what issues you might have, if you want us to work collaboratively, if you want us to ensure safety and security, you should also trust us enough to share information with us. Because it's only when you do that, that then we can be held accountable when we don't work effectively. But in this current state, when certain entities within the shipping communities are not willing to recognize the region as the first point of contact when there's an incident, it makes it very difficult for the region to even use the tools that they have to work effectively. I hope I've answered your question anyways. Thank you.
Well, that's been fantastic. And I just want to, we'll definitely come back to this point about the information sharing flow, because that is something that Admiral Junior and I have worked on in the context of an effort with the World Shipping Council. But we will we'll look at that in a bit. I want to ask a direct follow-up. This is kind of a strange question, but I really value your insight on this, and I think asking that question, how does it align, is a fantastic way for starting to come forward with a proposal. My question is, how do we make sense of the answer when putting forward a proposal? Because one of the issues that I think a lot of external actors have is that they're desperate to hear a yes. They're desperate to hear that they are desired, and sometimes don't understand where there's a degree of pushback that doesn't always match with their own understanding of yes and no. And so how do we translate better a genuine interest versus lip service? Over.
I'm happy again that there are people here that can actually answer these questions better than I can. But what I would say that ensuring that before you come to countries in the region, or before you come to regional agencies that are implementing some of these things, that you actually were aware of what the needs are. For instance, I talked about the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, and I could also add the Lomé Charter, for example, which details actually have a very holistic details of the aspirations of maritime security that the African continent and regional countries would want. If you've gone through this and then ensure that there are places of alignment, this would make it easier for countries in the region when you come to them not to pay lip service, because one, you literally are saying things that they also want to hear. You're saying things that they are interested in, and it becomes a case of how can we then work together to avoid replication. And this might also sort of come from a place of the regional, or should I say the external actors being willing to work with other external actors, because sometimes you find that a country A or an external country A might be interested in something that external country B is also interested in. And without organizing yourself, you will end up, one, replicating, and two, wasting resources that would have rather been, tailored or sort of extended to another place. So this is why, before you actually come to the table, before you draw up your own ambition for maritime security for the Gulf of Guinea or for any country on the African continent, make sure that there is an alignment with the ambitions or aspirations of those countries. It makes it easier for when you come to them, for them to literally see, well, we share similar goals. It then boils down to technicalities. How can we do this, rather than sort of trying to find a common ground, because your ambition does not necessarily represent their own ambition for their region. And this is what I see. I mean, this is some of the limitation I see, especially with the resolution, which is why I talked about it as an elitist resolution that centered the threat to those in the shipping industry, whilst relegating the threats that undermine the sustainability and livelihood of millions of Africans to the background. And but by this, I'm talking about issues relating to piracy, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, pollution by multinational oil companies and other people. Again, I hope that my response is sort of useful to you. Thank you.
Super useful. Thank you so much. And sorry for jumping on the follow-ups right out of the gate. But I want to now turn Admiral Junior. You are the director of the Interregional Coordination Center. We are very much looking forward to hearing your perspectives on all of this. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. ICC is many times being put aside on those dialogues, but it's very important to really get everything in the same forum to get ideas from both sides. This UN resolution 2634 is welcome, and it has a role to play. I'm talking about the African standby force, because in our forums we already have discussions very advanced for the constitution of maritime task force by the member states of the Gulf of Guinea. Technical, administrative, and operational details are currently being worked out by a committee that's set up to work with the African Union and its consultants on this matter. And the committee has met and is currently coming up with a plan for the operationalization of task force. In order to be as close as possible to the places where the illicit acts are being committed and to take into account the threats between neighboring countries, which are the threats are the same and they can differ from one zone to another. The Yaoundé architecture divided all the maritime space of the Gulf of Guinea from south to north into 5 zones, with a naval group following the example of that one of Zone D that is established in May 2009 following a technical agreement that was signed by those 4 countries. The naval group has been operating since then, thanks to the pooling of some resources that they have there on the said countries. And this model, the Yaoundé architecture encourage other models to ensure that that should be adopted. However, in West Africa, the zones have adopted other models to ensure that joint maritime patrols are done in their zones. So if these 5 zones establish 5 naval groups, they will easily constitute the Gulf of Guinea wide naval forces. This articulation will be as defined as the command structure is interregional level. It means a standby force. This the name indicates waits for a crisis situations, and its mission can be changed, but it will not ensure the permanent presence there, which is the aim of maritime patrols that are conducted in various countries. The standby brigades in Central and West Africa can support or back up these naval groups, and practically speaking, it will be difficult to deploy a ship outside its zone for the same reason that are currently hampering the development of naval groups. We take example of Zone D. It means for logistical reasons and difference in the threats. In one zone, the main threat is this one, in the other zone, the main threat is that one. Therefore, the resolution must be supported, and current efforts that partners are giving to the Gulf of Guinea to implement this. And also, the resolution mentions something that were mentioned before about the maritime organization of West and Central Africa. Has known the governance involve several stakeholders, cutting across civil and military agencies. That organization, Maritime Organization, West and Central Africa, was established by the ministers of transport for further goals, and the objectives aimed at improving the operating environment for the shipping industry in Central and West Africa. Its duty spans across maritime administrations, shipbuilding industry, the ports, and security, among others. But ICC, in the other hand, has more purely naval focus on maritime crime interdiction, detention, and prosecution. It means both agencies, they are existing, and they are based on collaboration on security matters, information sharing, and the training opportunities. I think that ICC and MAUCA, they are interregional because they are made up both from West and Central Africa countries, and has ICC is dealing mainly with maritime safety, maritime security, and the MAUCA is dealing mainly with port security. The two organizations are complementary. It means which they have signed a memorandum of understanding in 2019 in the areas of information sharing, training, and representation. So the Interregional Coordination Center is in the head of architecture that ends with interventions at sea, intervention forces at sea. The better cooperation and the collaboration among those two also will secure the wider maritime domain in order to promote maritime trade and even to the blue economy. The other thing that is in that resolution is dealing about international partners. So about international partners, we have that incident with Danish that merged the trust element, and that had either to exist between regional and extra-regional relationships. It clearly brought to the fore the imperative for collaborative frameworks to deepen security in the Gulf of Guinea. Naturally, there was apprehensions to exist with the expanding interests groups involved in Gulf of Guinea. We listen all the speakers that mentioned the coordinated maritime presence from countries from European Union. Also, we have naval exercises with NATO and others. So this is because the national interests often diverge from some point to particularly in the maritime security matters. But going forward, the ICC is clearly articulated a framework with all those partners. We call it Gulf of Guinea Sharing and the Confliction Forum, the shade. And that shade is for collaboration with extra-regional partners and that are involved in maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. And that forum is working very well. They have three subgroups. One is cooperation at sea, other is air cooperation, and the third one on the information sharing. So I think that that incident that is already described as Danish has enabled for both for the Gulf of Guinea and also the countries of Gulf of Guinea, and also for the Denmark that are helping to secure the maritime area. They helping to secure the maritime space in the Gulf of Guinea, and that to understand, unlike what happened in the coast of Somalia, here in the countries of the Gulf of Guinea, they are ensuring with the conditions to be optimized the surveillance of their waters under their jurisdiction, and that they do not intend to leave this regal duty to anyone else. So in the future, international vessels will have to work in the collaboration with coastal countries whenever they have the opportunity to intervene in their waters, especially if they know that is the coastal state that will take care of the legal consequences. It means the legal finish. He may start and then hand over. So we are working in the handover agreements. The West Africa already finished, and the Central Africa is working on that. And then there will no be excuse. So talking about a special partner in our areas of cooperation, that is NATO, that they could improve or say their cooperation, especially in the area of sharing information on those drug cartels and other organized crime syndicates that use the Gulf of Guinea as transit routes for their activities. And there could also be growing cooperation on the training ecosystem of the Yaoundé architecture. In other hand, they could also help building the capacity of coastal states. Building the capacity, it means platforms, infrastructures that are especially to combat piracy. So about the countries in the Gulf of Guinea, we considered something in that resolution that there are integrating elements of the Yaoundé architecture that with their standing operating procedures, they will deal with maritime crimes. But how we got there is by to bolster interoperability, to enhance better relationship with the region, because some of the okay, that is understood. And then the crime prevention also. We should have a strategy for crime prevention and to adopt it, because the nations need to reduce the factors of the crime prevention that give opportunity for other maritime and collaborative efforts in ensuring security. It means that if they find there is nothing to steal in the land, they obviously they will go to steal or to make robbery at sea. And then our structure is there to promote maritime trade and to go to the blue economy. And last one, let us speak that talking about how you say, how we can deep our relationships with the partners in the region. It is written there in the resolution that all the crimes should be have a deepened legal reform that could lead to properly prosecuted and properly penalized maritime crimes. When there was a relationship among terrorism and maritime crime. So what we have to do is to continue to implement the recommendations that were made for both resolutions, the first resolution, 2011, the second, 2012, and then this resolution, because as you see, we have many levels. We have national level, multinational level, and interregional. So all the recommendations are there. The Navy has the coastal and offshore capabilities, but is not competent to combat illegal acts other than piracy and armed robbery. So if we go to the maritime environment, we will find many other crimes that are not so given to the Navy. So by providing maybe intelligence data to the Navy on other operational centers along the coast, the competent administrations, they will enable these actors to enforce the regulations and even to deal very well with the perpetrators of other offenses. That thing is the one we captured in the resolution. So I am happy to have other questions to complement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I will definitely be asking you at least one follow-up question, but I want to get to our other speakers first. So let me turn now to Dr. Dakuku Peterside, the former Director General of NAMASA, and we've already heard a little bit from him, but looking forward to his interventions now. Dr. Peterside, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. I'm sure that you turned off my camera, or sorry. But I know you can hear me, so that's most important. Now, going through the UN resolution 2634 rather, it's clear that in terms of implementation, there are 3 levels of responsibility. The first level of responsibility is at the national level. The second level of responsibility is at the regional level. And the third level of responsibility is at the international or multilateral level. And they're not mutually exclusive, they're interconnected. Now, going through the text of that resolution, it makes it very clear, consistent with earlier resolutions, that the states of the Gulf of Guinea have primary responsibility for securing their waters. It specifically calls for the states of the Gulf of Guinea to criminalize piracy. And like I said earlier, some states of the region, precisely Nigeria, Senegal, Liberia, Cape Verde, Togo, Gabon, have already put in place a legal framework criminalizing piracy. And so this resolution strengthens that national level effort. Now, the other thing the resolution calls at the national level is for cooperation, especially in maritime operations, in interdiction of criminals at sea, arrest, prosecution, and for nations to take prompt action. Another emphasis of the resolution is the need to have a maritime security strategy in place, to also build their naval capabilities, key into the Yaoundé architecture, ensure the operationalization of their maritime operation centers, enhance maritime security awareness. None of these responsibilities is new. They were mentioned in earlier resolutions, Resolution 2018 and 2039, They were made in 2011 and the year 2011 and 2012 earlier. Now, at the regional level, the emphasis is in operationalization of the Yaoundé Code of Conduct or the Yaoundé architecture. Now, we are approaching the 10th anniversary of the Yaoundé architecture, and with benefit of hindsight, I don't think we can say that we have optimized the benefit of the Yaoundé architecture. We are yet to fully operationalize the Yaoundé architecture. It is only when we fully operationalize the Yaoundé architecture, we can begin to look at whether there is need for alternative platforms, or we continue to support Yaoundé architecture and strengthen it. Now, the resolution, of course, specifically identified the role of ECOWAS, ECAS, African Union, and other regional bodies. And what is new in the current resolution is the attempt to find a linkage between crime at sea and terrorism on land. This is something that is new, and Dr. Kamal-Deen Ali, in his earlier presentation or comments, had identified that this is something that is new in the current resolution. And the other thing he mentioned is the sustainable development of the Gulf of Guinea states. One speaker in another presentation had mentioned that the conditions that gave rise to piracy, or the conditions that sustain piracy, is still prevalent. And when he's talking about those conditions, I'm sure you understand that he's talking about poverty that is prevalent in the Gulf of Guinea states, the high level of unemployment, the fact of weak judicial system, the corruption that is prevalent in that area, the open borders, the inability of the states to secure their borders, and the narcotics trade that is taking place there. All those conditions are still prevalent. So it's obvious that the international community and even the African community cannot go to bed celebrating that there is a drastic drop in piracy. The conditions prevalent are still there. So we need to be vigilant, we need to be watchful, and we need to rather do more to ensure that we don't have a second wave of piracy that will be worse than the earlier wave of piracy. Now, there's also a role for the international community, whether it's support to Gulf of Guinea states, whether it's joint operations, whether in interagency cooperation and information sharing. And for NATO, there are a lot of things to learn. I think I want us to draw from experience. In the wake of maritime security in the Gulf of Aydin in 2008, and at the request of the United Nations, NATO started to support international efforts to combat piracy in the Gulf of Aydin of the Horn of Africa. And you know that they embarked on specific operations like Operation Allied Provider, Allied Protector, Operation Ocean Shield. And this indeed helped to deter and disrupt piracy attacks within that period. And NATO achieved this in close collaboration with other actors in the region, including the European Union's Operation Atlanta and other international efforts. So I think that is something we need to look at. At other points, NATO even supported the capacity building efforts of Gulf of Guinea states. I recall that at my time in Nimasa, we benefited from capacity building from NATO through its Maritime Interdiction Training Center in Greece in 2006. I recall that very, very well. So far, there's not been direct involvement of NATO in the Gulf of Guinea in terms of operational engagement, unlike the Gulf of Aydin, where you had many states that were stateless at the time, but the success record in the Gulf of Guinea states, or in Gulf of Aden rather, could in some form be replicated in Gulf of Guinea states with cooperation of the states of the region. I emphasize that with cooperation of the states of the region, because that appears to be a gap thus far. Many multilateral agencies, many international actors come into the region without situating the needs of the region, without engaging key actors of the region. I don't think we have stateless states in the Gulf of Guinea. I believe that the states of Gulf of Guinea are alive to their responsibility. They may have capacity gaps, they may have other gaps, but they are not stateless. They have governments in place, governments that are effective, governments that are responsible. And so even when we want to assist them, it makes sense to work with them. And so for me, the current resolution is not entirely different from earlier resolutions. Rather, it reinforces the earlier resolutions. It establishes things we have always known, and may have introduced a few new dimensions, including the ones identified earlier by Dr. Kamal-Deen Ali. The fact that he has introduced the dimension of transnational organized crime, sustainable development of Gulf of Guinea states, terrorism, its linkage to terrorism, even though it's not been established. My hope, personally, and my optimism, is that when the Secretary General's report will be submitted, I think it may have been submitted by now at the end of October through November, we'll try and see whether there's a linkage between crime at sea and the upsurge of terrorism in the region. But so far, there's no clear linkage. And so for me, one thing we need to take from this current resolution is that there need to be a balance between internal efforts to fight piracy and external support to fight piracy. There must be collaboration, there must be a meeting point, there must be synergy. Without that synergy, we'll be running around in circles, we will not achieve much. There are models that had worked elsewhere in the Gulf of Aydin, especially NATO was involved in that, and in other places. The coordinated maritime presence of the European Union has been partially successful because it has not worked effectively with the Gulf of Guinea states. So these are my own initial comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peterside. I think, one of the things that you just emphasized is really important to remember is that when the scourge of Gulf of Guinea piracy was really starting to gain external attention in 2010, 11, 12, many commentators were remarking that you could not transfer the lessons of counter-piracy from East Africa to the Gulf of Guinea because fundamentally what was happening was very different. As I said before, it was armed robbery at sea, oil theft. It wasn't piracy and holding vessels and their crew for ransom. And yet we are now at a point where, as you say, maybe we need to revisit that and see what lessons and insights really could be gleaned from not only NATO's, but some of the other external actors' engagements and engagements with each other that could be translated and transferred to the Gulf of Guinea. And we've already seen that in the previous discussions of SHADE, of the Shared Awareness and Deconfliction Exercise, which was originally a Horn of Africa focused mechanism for deconflicting operations. So I think those are really, really important remarks, and I thank you for them, and I look forward to asking some follow-up questions. I do want to turn now, though, to our final panelist before we get into the discussion. Captain Luc Maduma retired from the Gabon Navy just in the past year, and he has for many, many years been one of the leading voices in developing the cooperative mechanisms that we've been hearing about. He is the former Chief of Naval Staff of Gabon, and Loic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ian. Do you hear me very well? It's okay?
Reading you loud and clear.
Okay. Hey, Ian, always you give me the toughest job on all the conferences you have been inviting me. You gave me the last floor.
You always do such a good job, and you always come with insightful comments. So I look forward to what you have to say.
And now all has been said. I just don't know what to say now. I have to change all my presentation. But anyway, thank you for inviting me for this NATO hub, Jan, on how to implement this new resolution on the fights against piracy and organized crime in the Gulf of Guinea. I heard people trying to make a difference between piracy and organized crime. For me, all the crimes have been taken into account in the resolution, because when we say organized crime, a crime is a crime at sea. And I think everything should be prosecutable in terms of the sovereignty of countries. To begin my remarks, Jan, I would like particularly to congratulate our friend of Nigeria, who were able to put in place on the time a strategy of anticipation, which very early blocked the actions of pirates from their origins by very successfully controlling the waterways in the Niger Delta. That is very important. They did very well. If the deep blue water, I was waiting for lessons learned from this deep blue water, because we really need to learn on that. And I remember the last time we met, Dr. Peter Side and Dr. Jamodel told me, like, just wait, give us 2 years and you will see what will happen. And what they said is just what is happening right now. And I really want to congratulate them. I didn't say that all the piracy is coming from Nigeria, but since they did a very good job with this new strategy, it's very well. I think we need to organize webinar on how they can give us the lessons from this operation. It will be very, very beneficial for all countries, even partners, as well as Africans, local countries. We also need to recognize the fact that the European Navy sailing into our water have been also something that has been supporting on the suppress, or the diminution of this piracy. We do need to recognize that, yes, the presence at sea can be discouraging pirates sometimes. And it has also cooled the whims of potential pirates to go at sea when they knew that something very strong and powerful was waiting for them offshore. But when it comes to implementing the new resolution means taking stock of previous resolution, Jan, and seeing what is new on this new resolution. In my opinion, it is a matter of simply picking up where we left off to date and keeping the gains. Obviously, a lot has been certainly done, but we must not rest on our laurels just because.
I'm presenting.
Say again? Oh, sorry. And so to sum up on what has been said, we can say that the two previous resolutions are part of the Yaoundé architecture. The YAMS, the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, because when we started working, we did the Yaoundé Code of Conduct on the basis of the 2 or 3 previous resolutions. And this one is coming, but I don't see really what is new on it. And all that has been said is part of the Yaoundé mechanism we're doing now. But unfortunately, something important, Jan, we have not been able to sign to get the Yaoundé Code of Conduct binding. This is one of the failures on which we need to work as soon as possible. When analyzing the new resolution, I realized that it is a question of updating the Yaoundé Code of Conduct and making it binding. In my opinion, it is more or less a question of consolidating achievements and putting a particular emphasis on following points. Please, I did not respond to your question. I just went to develop something different. So sorry for that. I'm not I'm not as so good as you can say, Sabian. So,
please, I think that what you're bringing up is something that you and I have talked about, and I've talked with many of the others about many times. Let me just ask a direct follow-up. Why is it important to have the Yaoundé Code of Conduct become binding in your view?
It's inside most of the thing I'm going to talk in the few now, right? So we need to update and sign the Yaoundé Code of Conduct, because the head of state, look at this. This is the most important. The head of state must meet as soon as possible. Since we know that the maritime is very important for our development, the maritime is very important for the social security matter for the Gulf of Guinea. So it's very important for our head of state to meet as soon as possible, as often as possible they should, because there are many, many important things going on at sea. So we need to do it urgently because it settles many questions. The Yaoundé Code of Conduct is settling many questions that come up into this new resolution. This global action will make it possible to implement the recommendations that have not yet been implemented, but also to consolidate the achievement, because we have everything in this Code of Conduct. We have everything. But the summit of the head of state is also the more important, because it will give the opportunity to redistribute the roles of the various maritime agencies, particularly in the fight against maritime scud, like MOCA, like Port Authority, like the council, the Charter Council of West and Central Africa, because they can play a role. They but they don't have a role assigned. Since they are being created by the ministries, the Yaoundé Code of Conduct has been also signed by the ministry, so they are like, they are working side by side, but without cooperating. It's very important for the head of state to determine what this agency can be doing, and this cannot be done out of the summit I'm talking about. And also, to implement the resolution as it has been defined by the UN is acting a strong mobilization of the head of state himself. Because when I went through the resolution, I saw 3 levels of action. First one is at the presidency level. The second one will be at the regional bodies level. And the last one is something that I can say tactical operational activities. So it's still important. We need to organize that. We need to recognize that it's still important to maintain an international maritime presence at sea. But remember, we went to Nepal and we worked on the joint combined maritime forces. So before the Danish and the European Navy, they went to Gulf of Guinea. You remember, we told them that it was very important to have like African naval officer sailing into, in the international Navy basis. So it's very important. But my question is it easy to take the boats from Cameroon, from Gabon, from Benin to go and sail in Nigeria or into another water? Because the situation with the Danish boats can also occur from a Cameroonian boat. What will be the reaction of Nigeria, or what will be the reaction of Gabonese Navy? So this is something we need to take care of. That's why most of the time we never bring countries close to the threat of oppression, because we know that there can be a reprisal from the country when we have some incident like this. And we all know that in terms of international relations and oppression. So as he said, as the Admiral said, the task force is important, but it should be on the basis of the joint combined maritime forces, bringing Europeans, Africans, and whoever want to come and invest of there. This has a lot of advantages, like the information. You know, Jan, we talk about information sharing, but I've never heard about collecting this information. I've never heard about that. But unfortunately, the satellite radars that we need to anticipate the pirates' activity, they belong to NATO's country, most of them. This is something where I just don't understand what the NATO is doing, because we need this information, but they have it. Remember, we went through this work to see how we can develop a satellite for the surveillance of the Gulf of Guinea. We had skylights that came and they invest on that. We had also global fishing work doing that. We have StrikeMat also. Many companies came, but no African country went to them to work and see how we can better develop the facility that was there. And I think something that's very important is how to bring the head of state together to say, okay, let us invest on one satellite for the surveillance of the maritime, the maritime domain. And I'm very, very sure that all these countries, they are all producers, they can do that. But we experts, sometimes we don't have the necessary vision to go and present it to our head of state. But also we need to have the head of state together and tell them, look, we need to have a satellite. Or at least we need to invest on an existing satellite to have more data. Also, it has been said by Kamal-Deen and the doctor about how to get prosecutable all the crime at sea. This is something, the UN ODC is working on that. And I think also the ACSS is willing to jump on this subject. So this is something that it's doable. It's doable, but it takes time, because it's a matter of sovereignty of countries. So it's not easy to do like in the single countries. And the more important, Jan, piracy begins on land, and it's planned on land. It goes at sea, it comes back at land, because the money coming from the piracy is spent on the land. So it's very important. And this is something for me, we didn't think about that when we started, even myself, we didn't think about it. We need to work on the robust intelligence mechanism, human intelligence, technology intelligence, to anticipate. And I think this is what Nigeria did with the deep blue water, because they went into the waterways and they anticipate the pirates' action with probably satellites. We can use this. We can monitor the phone conversation from the pirates. And you guys from NATO, you have this system because you are spying presidents amongst presidents, affairs among them. We can use it. Sorry about that. We can use it for the pirates. Please, leave the president sleeping, leave them getting some rest. Let us spy pirates. And also, that's the last one. This is the last one, probably, Jan. The last one is that by drafting strategy, we have created a hub of business, a hub of investment. I still don't understand why countries, European countries that are shipbuilders, they don't go to Africa and work on acquisition mechanism. It could be on oil return, like oil against boats. We can find any mechanism. And the shippers also, the maritime industry, why they don't go with the country to work on this basis? Because we need boats. African countries probably need boats. They will never refuse to pay. But since there are no mechanism, since the African or European want to be paid cash, it will be very, very difficult. And you know, the crisis is worldwide. So we need to work on this kind of mechanism, how to see how we can acquire boats. We need to work on how to collect data. We need to work on how to share the data that belongs to European countries, because they have the best system of radar and satellite surveillance. And to conclude, Jan, I think we have been doing very well. But COVID came and slowed down the things. And also, since the European or IMO can now discuss with ICC and determine what they can really be doing together, this is where we are. This is what we need to do only. And the last one, as I said, we need to have head of states meeting, like it was said after Yaoundé, because they are the only one that can take some decision. And also, Nigeria is doing very, very good, right? And they don't have to be left alone on this tremendous job they're doing. We need to see how we can support them. Thank you, Jan. I hope I say much about what you really wanted for me to talk about. Thank you.
You've never disappointed me. That remains true today. So thank you very much. I have to say, you know, your point about piracy starting on land and returning to land is so important. We've said for years, you and I both talked about this, is that piracy is a land-based problem with maritime symptoms. But the same in some ways can be said of a lot of the other transnational organized crimes, because the point isn't to get drugs out at sea, it's to get drugs to another land. I think whether it's fishing, drugs, arms, humans, whatever the illicit activity, that focus on land is something that keeps coming up through all of our discussions. And so that brings up the question, how do we break down some of the barriers where information is held as power from one group to another, and actually get not only a free flow of information, but doing so in a way that is sufficiently rapid that the right information gets the right decision makers in sufficiently timely fashion. That brings to one of the questions that was posed in an earlier, the earlier panel. The YERES platform is you know, one of the things that has been put forward to support information sharing. And I'm wondering how you feel about that, or if you have recommendations or suggestions for how to actually more effectively get information to move. We also heard about the problem of information sometimes ending up in Europe about an incident that is occurring in the Gulf of Guinea, and that the nearshore Gulf of Guinea actors are the last people to hear about something that's happening off of their coast. So how do we go about solving some of these issues? So I'm happy for whomever to start, but Loic, since you brought up the information sharing and that land-based aspect, I'll start with you.
Okay. Since we started, you have never been able to build a strong maritime picture. When it's about maritime picture, it means a MDA system that is shared by all the countries, even Europeans or African countries. Since we have a recognized and well-organized maritime picture, the information will flow easily, either from Europe or from African countries. This is the problem, because if you have your satellite, a radar satellite that I don't have, you will be the first to see what's happening. And this is the situation in the Gulf of Guinea, unfortunately. But how to share? We have the mechanism to share. We have been sharing, but the problem, as I said, is how to collect the information at the earliest beginning. This is where we need to work very, very well. We don't need to sail all at the same time at sea, but since we have a very good information, we can organize the interceptions. This is what I think. This is something, it's a basic.
It's such a great point, and your point about wanting to learn from the case study of Deep Blue is really critical, because as you say, if the crime is having to come back to land, we don't necessarily have to interdict it at sea. And so the question is, how do we become sufficiently effective in both building the operational picture and the intelligence picture, but as well the information flows so that the response at the shore can be effective. Admiral Junior, I want to turn to you, because we have been discussing this a lot. The issue that sometimes the Gulf of Guinea maritime agencies are the last to find out about something that's happening in their own waters. How do you recommend we proceed with improving that situation?
We are already implementing different systems, and we realize that we have benefits if we implement both of them. So we are avoiding the monopoly of information sharing. It means that not only to be based on the maybe HF that is called the first kind of information, but then later we have internet. It means we are trying to have both kinds of information together, even on systems and partnership, putting aside that we have Yaris that is promised by European Union and is being finishing the first phase, but there are still 2 phases to come. So we also have other initiatives that are ongoing. It means we will have all the, let's say, multi systems working together. We will not stick to only one, because if this happens, one port of entry is one port of failure. Okay, thank you.
Hope you'll agree with me. Can you hear me? Yes. I hope you'll agree with me that just having the technology to be able to share information does not translate into the information actually flowing in a not only in a timely manner, but in an effective manner. Because sometimes we don't have a clear sense of what information another actor might need. For example, what's important to us might be different than what's important to someone else. And as a lawyer, I know that too often there are gaps in the data as it's flown, as it flows, and so cases that could have been major successes end up failures just for lack of sufficient information. So the question is, how do we go about operationalizing the tools in an effective manner and process so that there is a consistent understanding of not only within the Gulf of Guinea what information needs to flow, but external actors also understand how they can contribute information to the Gulf of Guinea in an effective way?
So the advantage in YARI system is that it can receive many sources, not only getting from one source. It means that when the conceptions was made, it was to accept sources from the left, from the right, from all the sources to be accepted. But that is only one part of the question, because if the information is needed, it means the student will give the proof to the teacher to assess it. But if it's not the need, it can be closed, and when the information will be open, will not be needed for anybody, because all the importance that word that time it's already finished. So to operationalize the tools, we are accepting all the initiatives that are being presented. So all the initiatives are being taken, we implement, and the way to implement it is by naval exercises and trainings. After a naval exercise and training, we can see that, okay, this can be used here, and be that one can be, how you say, iced, or can be even neglected. So the standard operating procedures are being were already written and are being put in practice. So that is one of the tasks that we are now taking a look, which one of the initiatives will be ahead, which one will be put on hold.
Thank you very much. And I think that point about standard operating procedures is really important, because just knowing that you can do something doesn't mean that everybody understands that they need to on a regular basis or a repeatable way. And I want to actually turn to Dr. Peter's side, who during his time as Director General in AMASA also was involved, I believe, with helping to support the harmonized standard operating procedures, or HSOPs, that have been at the national level in Nigeria, helping to create an interagency approach. Sir, would you be willing to comment on that at all?
Thank you very much. I'll quickly share our experience in Nigeria. We realized that in country, we had many different maritime domain awareness assets. The Nigerian Navy has, because it's still there, Falcon Eye. Then NIMASA had the deep blue C4I, the Nigerian Ports Authority. And so the first step, what we did in Nigeria was to integrate these various maritime assets. But I realized over time that at the regional level, we've not been able to integrate the maritime domain awareness assets we have. There is the Interregional Coordination Center, I acknowledge that, but we don't have integrated maritime. So that's challenge number one, integration of the various maritime domain awareness assets within the region. And so we see people act in silos. The information they have in Ghana, we may not have it in Nigeria, even when we need it in Nigeria, even when we need to share information. And so information is shared partially, not in an integrated manner. Now, the other thing I realized is that there's minimal collaboration by the various states of the Gulf of Guinea in terms of information sharing. Many of them will be willing to share information with international actors outside the region than to share with actors within the region. And the ICC and the YARI architecture has a role to play in that, in fostering that collaboration and building trust. It appears that most of the Gulf of Guinea states believe that other Gulf of Guinea states are likely to abuse the information if they share actionable intelligence. The other thing I realized is a challenge is interpretation and use of data. Now, most Gulf of Guinea states, from my own experience, even when you give them the maritime domain awareness assets or you support them with maritime, they don't understand how to interpret the data, how to use that information appropriately. It appears that it's an area of challenge. We need to build capacity in that area. And so very many times you get information, but they don't know what to do with information. At the other end is that they don't have the capability to use that information. Now, I am happy that the director of the ICC had mentioned that is developing a standard operating procedure for sharing information. It is very critical. There are information that need to be shared at regional level. There are information that needs to be shared at national level. And so for me, it's critical that we integrate all our maritime domain awareness assets. That's a major step. Now, the other step is that we build the capacity of our people to use information, to interpret information, interpret data, deploy actionable intelligence. That's another critical element. Another important thing is what is already doing the development of standard operating procedure at the regional level. At the Nigerian level, we already have the harmonized standard operating procedure, which involves all the actors in the maritime space. And it's working very well, effectively. And we got support from both UNODC and other international actors in developing a national harmonized standard operating procedure. I think it's an experience that will be very useful at the regional level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I want to emphasize that this maritime domain awareness space is something that has become a real point of discussion. And I know that across the Gulf of Guinea, different actors have been trying to work towards the common operating picture. The U.S. Navy provides Sea Vision, and I understand that just in the last 24 hours, there have been 2 downloads of synthetic aperture radar, or SAR data, not to be confused with search and rescue, but synthetic aperture radar data that can aid in identifying pattern of life and activities that could be interdicted. There are other platforms that are being used in the regional centers as well, including, as was mentioned before, Skylight, which focuses on transshipment, and Global Fishing Watch, which is a free platform that is really doing remarkable stuff to fight specifically IUU fishing. But even having said that, and even recognizing the director of ICC's comment about being somewhat platform agnostic in terms of using multiple platforms and getting the benefits out of all of them, I think that Dr. Peterside's point about analysis is absolutely critical. Because even if you have all the information you need, if you can't make sense of it and turn it into actionable understanding, that then is filtered to the people who actually have not only the physical capacity, but the legal authority to act, we don't get anywhere. And so all of these processes really need to be not only enhanced in terms of the capacity building, but exercised regularly. And I want to turn to something that Loic, you have said repeatedly in the past. You've mentioned the point or the recommendation that we have a permanent Obangame Express. Obangame Express is the US-led naval exercise involving all the Gulf of Guinea states. And I'm wondering if any of you are willing to talk about how to, particularly with this advent of a standby force, maybe create the conditions where there is enough exercising that it becomes the norm rather than a week or 2 week or incidental anomaly, so that everybody is working together in a joint and combined fashion as frequently as possible. Any thoughts on that?
Thoughts on the African standby force?
Yeah, and how to really turn it into something other than just a theoretical capacity. Make it something that is used enough that it is actually operationally effective in combating some of these challenges.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, ICC, you can go ahead.
Let's go with Admiral Junior first.
Okay. Now, ICC is dealing with the IMO in Maritime Safety Committee. and is asking all the countries in the region to support the resolution that is being worked there. They call it SOLAS amended number 5, something that is related to global maritime distress system. What is the main importance of that SOLAS amendment is that long-range identification and tracking of ships is a system that it's not available for all the countries in the region. We have 19 coastal states, but around 7 states, they have already established that. But with that amendment, all the states can be benefit for that amendment. It means that even a country that doesn't have, and I mean, it's not necessary for everybody to have a Jaguar. It means you can be transported in another kind of transport. You will be arriving there. It means that if this amendment will be accepted there, all the countries from Senegal until Angola and so on, they will benefit for this, and we will receive the information about ships that are around 1,000 miles from the coast. You know that now we are struggling to have information on territorial waters, but this some of captains of ship, they take opportunity, they leave the port, leave the territorial waters, and then they send a message that I was robbed in that port, and no investigation can be made because he already is gone. But with this possibility, the track of the ship can be followed, and in the next port he can be asked about what happened days ago. Thank you.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Dr. Peter Seid, I think you were next, and then Loic.
All right, thank you. On the African Standby Force, I need to say this. You know, it's an establishment of the African Union, and the specific purpose is to support peace missions. It was not set up for maritime purposes, even though maritime crime is part of the holistic peace mission in the continent. The Yaoundé architecture becomes more relevant because first, it has the ICC, one, the International Coordination Center. It has 2 major centers, Chris Mark for West Africa, Chris Mao for, Chris Mark for Central Africa rather, Chris Mao for Central Africa, and 5 operational maritime zones. Now, I think the real challenge is the fact that we've not fully operationalized these 5 operational maritime zones. That is the key challenge with enforcement and with regional cooperation in terms of deployment of assets, in terms of presence at sea. That's a real challenge. So we need to look at the Yaoundé architecture again, and particularly the 2 centers at Abidjan and Petnel, Congo, that's the Chris Mark and Chris Mao, and the 5 regional centers. So when we talk about presence at sea to deter criminals, I think sincerely that the Yaoundé architecture represented by the Interregional Coordination Center, Chris Mark, Chris Mao, and the 5 operational centers are more relevant. So I think that a lot can be achieved under the architecture if we get the state parties to give full support. That's the critical challenge there. And when key actors talk about making the Yande architecture mandatory, it becomes relevant. It becomes relevant when that instrument, if we make that instrument binding on state parties. Currently, the countries of the Gulf of Guinea have a laissez-faire attitude towards the Interregional Coordination Center beyond the architecture. You know, if at the strategic level of the heads of state and heads of government, ECOWAS and ECAS, they come back again, it's actually their baby, and make it binding and mandatory. Support Interregional Coordination Center. I believe that would have solved most of our problems. That appears to be the gap for me. So the African Standby Force is there and might play secondary role. But when you talk about maritime security, it is the Interregional Coordination Center, CRISMAR, and the five operational centers with the national maritime operational centers that have primary role to play.
Thank you so much. I think
so. They need support.
Yes, and I think Loic will agree with you entirely. But Loic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ian. I think Peter's side said the most important. You look at what's happening within the Zone D between Gabon, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, and South Tome and Principe. They have this Zone D operation, which is doing, I think they're doing well. They don't have a support. The country are providing all the logistical support since 10 years now. They're doing it. I think we need to do this for the Zone E between Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Niger. This is very important. It should attenuate the situation, and this will give us a presence at sea within this zone. This is something we need to work on as soon as possible. Look at what is happening within the zone. There is no need to organize a hot pursuit from a boat, an Equatorial Guinea boat sailing in that zone, because they made provision on the agreement they made between countries. They sort out the issue of hot pursuit. This is things we can apply. But let me tell you this, the only thing, the most important we need to do is to bring back ICC, IMO, and NATO to work together and to see how operationally talking they can be supported, the things we've done, because this is where the problem came in the past, because IMO and some European countries, they were not willing on the way the ICC was implemented. It was about to separate operation and administration. If we can do this, as Peter's side said, yes, the things will work, because this is where the situation is. To have a presence at sea. When it's come to talk about African standby forces, just because it's really about the same means. If you ask a boat from Gabon, it's the same boat that is on the catalog of the African standby forces. So as I said, it could be supporting, but in terms of access, in terms of agreements, African standby force, it's about peacekeeping operation, and the mandates are not the same at the time. But the ICC or CRISMA, they have different mandates in which they can engage the operation and go at 5 if there is a need to go at 5. This is the difference. So let us operationalize the Zone E tomorrow. Let us bring means for Zone E. Give them the support, diesel and everything. You will see how we attenuate the piracy in this area, like we have been able to do within Zone D. Thank you.
Sorry, I wanted to intervene about the binding and not binding. The Yaoundé Code of Conduct, the name says it's a code of conduct. It's how they have to behave. So in the article Article 19, it is said that nothing in this code of conduct is binding. So the code itself says
Yes.
that it is not binding. And it says except the Article 13. So if we go to the Article 13, it says that all the states have to cooperate, must cooperate when it deals with the crimes like piracy. Also, if you see that is from UNCLOS, it means that if we need to do this code of conduct binding document, we have to follow the recommendations that were made on the first assessment. That was that evaluation was 2017. There are a list of recommendations, but unfortunately, until now, not all of the recommendations, even the main of one, were not fulfilled, were not respected. So after we finish that the recommendations, we can redo everything, because the Yaoundé Code of Conduct is a process. It's not a final step. It's a process to go to the secure Gulf of Guinea toward the blue economy. And also there was a thought about the task force. It means that if we have the zone established, so that zone can contribute to the overall force of the Gulf of Guinea. For instance, now we have zones that already formalized their cooperation. But it doesn't mean that it's not operational. I'm talking about Zone G. Zone G, where Senegal, Gambia, Cape Verde, and Guinea, because they already started working a long time ago, but the formal documents were not signed. Is the reason we told that it's not operationalized. But now they already formalized this I say intention, and now even the multinational center will be populated by the human resources coming from different sides. That is, we call that operationalization, but they already started working a long time ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Nem, I see that you have your hand up, and I'm delighted to hand over the podium to you.
Thank you so much. Just quickly before I leave, I just want to tell you that, of course, thanking all the speakers because they gave a lot of insights to the discussion about the information sharing and technology. I think this is a point where big internationalizations can assist a lot in. I have been attending Cutlass and Abu Ghama, so I know what the US military has been doing, but I think for the rest of the big organizations, the international ones who have the capacity and the will to do so, they should open up more, sharing the information to the Gulf of Guinea states. As someone just mentioned, sometimes even officers don't know how to analyze what the information entails. So it's important to train them on how to analyze it, provide the tools to analyze it. I think it has been like, I believe since I studied law 30 or 40 years ago, we're still calling for real transfer of technology. Because until now, we get data, we can download maps and we can follow the movement and trace and track some movements in different parts of the seas, but we don't have this tools at hand at home. So if the countries of the Gulf of Guinea have these programs at home, it will be easier for them to follow up and honor their own responsibilities. The last thing I want to touch upon is the African Standby Force. It's rightly indicated the African Standby Force mandate, although it's not fully operational in all the parts of Africa, but the mandate is in relation to, in a layman's word, is to stop an escalation of a situation to become into a war. In order to have it involved in acts of piracy, armed robbery, and so on, then it needs expansion of its mandate. Like I know, for example, for the East, Cutlass Express, the African Standby Force leader in the Eastern region attended the Cutlass Express, but that was it. Because at the end of the day, if we speak about security overall, yes, they are there, but they will not move because of that mandate. So if, and I keep saying if here, if it's necessary, maybe states, if they find there is a need, as I can see from the practitioners here, there might be a need of this, maybe they can knock the door of the policy organs of the African Union to expand the mandate of the African Standby Force to include different types of maritime security, or maybe the Gulf of Guinea states can establish similar standby force for themselves. So they will have both mandates. I'll stop at that. Thank you very much, and see you next time.
Thank you so much. And those are some very useful and helpful contributions as we come to the end of our time together. I see, Loic, you have your hand up, and I want to recognize that and then pose one final question before we wrap up. So Loic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan. I just want to refresh our mind about the code of conduct. Originally, it wasn't a code of conduct. When we were preparing Yaoundé, we had a meeting in Benin. And unfortunately, many countries didn't want to sign directly a binding agreement on how to suppress illegal activities at sea. They wanted something they can present to their head of state. That's why we removed, because it was a multilateral agreement. And I remember that inside the agreement, European country or country not from the Gulf of Guinea were able to join the process, the mechanism. That's why we went to a code of conduct, but normally it's a multilateral agreement, and it was supposed to be binding 3 years later. But within this time, we have not been able to regroup the head of state and present different recommendation, even if they are still waiting for the meeting, because they are still asking, but there is no one able to bring the head of state together to say, this is what you need to do. It's not a code of conduct. That's normal. That's why we said it's not mandatory, because we changed the title of the document. It is a multilateral agreement. This is what I wanted to just to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I saw that there was a question about analysis and the role of various platforms, specifically Yaris in providing that analysis. And I think, one of the things that, keeps coming up is the need for turning data into understanding into action. And that can only be done with some degree of understanding as well of the regional environment. And that's why it is so important to make sure that this is not an externally driven, but as Kamal said at the first panel, a regionally driven process of trying to address the problems that plague the region. So I want to end with one question that was posed earlier, and I'm going to amend it a little bit. The question was originally, how would the presence of a Chinese naval base in Equatorial Guinea affect the maritime security picture? And many of you maybe know that there has been rumor or discussion of a Chinese base being located there. But I'll expand that question to just ask, how would any of you feel about any foreign non-regional naval base being located on the Atlantic coast of Africa? Because we've certainly seen an increase in the external basing on the eastern seaboard of Africa, particularly in Djibouti. But this would, any base from an external power would be the first on the western seaboard. So over to any of you to answer that. And I see that Dr. Ife for Yarwood will go first. Ife.
So thank you so much for the question. I raised my hand not because I wanted to go first in answering the question, but because I wanted to touch on the point about Yaris. I do want to say that I absolutely agree with all the point that has been made, especially in relation to technology. Technology have a very important role to play. We see the role that it's playing in supporting, generally combating the threats in the region. But at the same time, the point that was raised about personnel not being able to interpret data, for instance, so the need for training, the need for ensuring that even though we have so many actors, and this is where the point comes in. Yaris is important, for instance, but there is a problem, at least I see personally as a researcher and someone that engages with a lot of people working in the region. There seems to be like a disconnect or maybe some sort of difficulty in selling the idea of Yaris to countries in the region, which is why we're seeing them moving from one place to another to educate and support people to see how it works. And the reason for this is that there are so many other technologies coming in, and so it feels like there is duplication of the same ideas or similar ideas. And maybe this is something that, again, we need to get right to avoid the waste of resources that could have been directed to something else or somewhere else. And these resources can then be invested into training people to know how to interpret the data that we're receiving from different places. In relation to how would we feel about naval presence, personally, and based on the work that I do, I don't see if it is true that Chinese presence would be a problem. I wonder, is the US presence in the region a problem? Absolutely not. At least I don't see that as a problem. So long as that there is sort of this relationship or agreement between the countries where whatever, if it exists, so long as there is an agreement and the countries are aware of what they're getting themselves into, I think that is the most important thing, because at the end of the day, in reality, the maritime space is too vast for any one country, be it on the African continent or elsewhere, even the most powerful states, to manage on their own, which is why for us to get to the point where we have a sustainable solution or holistic solution to addressing threats at sea requires cooperation and collaboration. So personally, I do not see it as a problem so long as the countries in the region or the countries that are adjacent to where they will be operating would be aware of it, are also in support of it. Besides, I don't see a problem with the current presence that we have in the region as of now. So that's my perspective. Thank you.
Very much. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
Thank you. Yes. Are you listening? Yes, I don't think that in following the policy of open seas, that Chinese Navy will be not accepted because the open seas policy says that the sea is open for navigation for everybody. But telling that we have some countries that have relationships with other countries, it means that they can ask port calls to that country, to another country. So there we cannot intervene because the countries are sovereign and they can accept everywhere. Also following the Yaoundé Code of Conduct that encourage international community to participate in the efforts of Gulf of Guinea states. It means that all the states are encouraged to give their contribution to that problem. So it's up to the states that will accept the presence in their ports. And also, if we know that there is a ZOPACAS, that is a South Atlantic zone of, it is an organization that doesn't allow for the nuclear weapons to be used at the South Atlantic. So also they are there to avoid that something on that direction will happen in the South Atlantic. It means that there is no, we cannot see a threat from that side. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Admiral. My comment is similar to that of Okafor Yarwood and what Admiral said. Now, if it is true that China is trying to establish a naval base in Equatorial Guinea, it is in line and in the spirit of the latest UN resolution that encourages bilateral relationship. For me, predictably, if China is trying to establish a naval base, the only explanation is for their economic interest. But in addition, it will add to naval assets that will police the waters. I'm sure you may have noticed lately that there is a movement right now of piracy activities from West Africa moving towards Central Africa. As it's reducing drastically in West Africa, it is not reducing at the same rate as Central Africa. They're actually rather moving to Central Africa. And Equatorial Guinea is strategic in that direction. So if China decides to establish a naval base in Equatorial Guinea and it serves Equatorial Guinea's national interest, there's not much we can do. The only thing is that we international engagement, but just like I said earlier, it clearly aligns with the latest UN resolution that encourages and multilateral, of course, supports that nations, international community should continue to assist in enhancing the capabilities of other nations. So I don't see anything wrong with it. We shouldn't look at it beyond what it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've now come to the end of our time together, unfortunately. It's gone by very quickly. I want to just offer up the four speakers on this panel an opportunity to say any final remarks in 30 seconds or fewer. And I'll start with Ife and go in the order that we went. So Dr. Okafor Yarwood, the floor is yours.
I just want to conclude by sort of indirectly answering the question whether there's something else apart from Yaris. We have sea vision, as we've already mentioned, or someone else have already written. And in relation to other things, we have the skylight. There's of course the Yaris, there is the AIS, and also the information that is coming out from elsewhere. And from the Nigerian perspective, we have the Deep Blue and Falcon Eye. And from the fisheries perspective of different countries in the region, they also have their own monitoring system that they're able to relay information. And so these are things that actually were in existence before Yaris was established. And so Yaris is trying to compete with something that people are already familiar with, which is why it seems that there is a disconnect. But this is not a problem. This is a positive thing, because in the long run, at least the expectation is that Yaris will become a Gulf of Guinea thing. And so hopefully that long-term vision is something that will help them to become more effective in the long run and doing things more effectively. I want to thank everyone for the contribution. And I also want to say that there is absolutely 101 role for international communities and partners to play. The Gulf of Guinea countries cannot do it alone, but it has to come from a place of collaboration and cooperation rather than imposing your ideas or whatever, regardless of the positive or ambition. You need to work with the countries that you're interested in engaging with. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Admiral Junior, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for the patience to listen to us. That was a good initiative from the South Hub Center. So let's say that the Yaris is only one of the systems that we are using, and it's being designed for us. And when it will be finished, it will be downloaded in Africa. It will not be like the M.gov and M.tisk that after some time they went back to Brest and Portsmouth. So it's to say that we also are avoiding the monopoly of the information. So it means that all the initiatives that are there, maybe they will be paid or something, but they will be used for hours. It is because we are now having our maritime culture. Before 40, 50, 60 years ago, we didn't have nothing in this area. We are still building. About the international presence in our area, that was the first steps. I think in the later stage, some of them with the time will be not in the same importance level, and that is process of learning. So thank you very much again for your presence, and God bless.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peterside.
Let me join the two earlier speakers to thank NATO South Hub for convening this important platform or meeting, and to say that by the UN Security Council resolution, it strengthens and gives credibility to multilateral action being done in the Gulf of Guinea, whether in terms of information sharing, whether in terms of joint exercises, whether in terms of joint Navy operation or conduct of patrols. But the emphasis is on collaboration with the states of the Gulf of Guinea. I have to emphasize collaboration with the states of the Gulf of Guinea. And for NATO, you have a critical role to play. And that role comes with adaptation of what was done in the Gulf of Aden between 2008 and 2009. Adaptation, I also repeat that, to adapt. So you're not going to replicate what you did in the Gulf of Aden, in the Gulf of Guinea, but to adapt what you did, the ones that are useful, the ones that can fit into the situation in the Gulf of Guinea. And finally, to say that yes, there's a drastic drop in incidences of piracy, but the conditions prevalent that leads to or support the escalation of piracy is still there, whether it's unemployment, whether it's corruption, whether it's high level of poverty, whether it's imbalance in development, all those conditions are still there. And so if we don't keep an eye on the Gulf of Guinea, we might experience another wave of piracy. And finally, that there is need to encourage nation states or countries that are doing well there. Of course, you know that Nigeria is clearly doing well. They need all the support, whether in form of training, other forms of collaboration. It is key. Thank you very much. I hope we'll have more of this section so that this conversation can continue on ending, because it's critical. And for as long as this conversation continues, we'll keep our eyes on what's going on in the Gulf of Guinea. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Likman, final words.
Thank you, Ian. What I will say is only the fact that we really need to have our head of states meeting more often for the maritime issues, because it's a strategic area. You can see how Europeans head of state are meeting when it's about maritime. In the US, it's almost the same situation. Because I remember what we have done in 2013 in Yaoundé, just one meeting, and we solved many, many issues. We have been to Nigeria for the Global Maritime Security Conference. I can see what Nigeria has been doing from that time to now. It's very important when we bring people together with our head of state to discuss the matters. Let me tell you this. If the head of state don't meet, it might be impossible to bring a satellite radar system over our states, because they want to know what's going on there. Sometimes the experts, they can be solving issues, but since we don't have the approval of our bosses, it's very, very difficult to implement. And if sharing information is something you can't do without of the head of states. This is why I recommend for the strong and robust intelligence, and we need to bring this Gulf of Guinea Commission Forum on Intelligence, because they regroup the whole intelligence agencies that are linked to the head of states. So in terms of decision making, it should be very important to have this entirety working into the system to have decision made very, very rapidly. This is my recommendation. Let us bring the other states together and let us start where we stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our time together, and it is on me, therefore, just to say a very heartfelt thank you to all 8 of our panelists, as well as to all the participants who have been with us for these 4 hours, which is quite a long time, but a very, very important time spent. And I thank all of you for dedicating and devoting that energy that has made this conversation so rich, so important, and I think hopefully so useful. I am taking away a lot from this myself, and I think in terms of our 2 stated objectives, one, to better understand the UN Security Council resolution and its implementation. The words that will be ringing in my head are when requested. And so thank you for emphasizing just how important that is, because ultimately political will is very important, and we need to build that political will, but respect for sovereignty on all fronts is absolutely vital to making any of this work, and we cannot ever forget that. And on the second front, in terms of NATO, mindful of those lessons, I think there are certainly some clear roles that NATO and specifically the hub could play in helping continue this conversation and creating that forum for connecting all these different actors and all these different stakeholders who often don't even get to hear each other or speak. And so thank you for giving us the opportunity to do some of that today and to give a chance to listen and hear. On the point of listening, I think that NATO also has a lot more perhaps to share than it often thinks. Not only in terms of the experience of Ocean Shield and the counter-piracy efforts in the Gulf of Aden, as was mentioned by Dr. Peterside and others, but also just in the experience of being a multinational force and all the challenges that come with that, particularly as this task force and the more operational side of multinational operations and combined operations at sea take hold in the Gulf of Guinea. The challenges of being a multinational force are something that I think the region really can benefit from hearing about and learning about more. And finally, I think every actor has a role to play in exercising and training, not just on operations, but also information sharing, because we all have a responsibility to each other to share what we understand, to share what we can see, and to hopefully turn that into meaningful action that supports the rule of law, supports the sovereignty of the states, and ultimately makes the waters, not just of the Gulf of Guinea, but the entire world, inhospitable to security threats and those who would do us harm. So I thank all of you for contributing to that conversation and discussion today. Commander Ricardo Lopes, do you have anything on behalf of the hub to add in final remarks?
Yes. First of all, on behalf of the NATO Strategic Direction South Hub Director, I would like to thank you, Dr. Ian, and all the experts and speakers for your sharing your vast experience and knowledge during this webinar. I was afraid that our notebooks were not enough to write all notes here. So the hub was established to improve NATO awareness from the South. So we need to understand all the opportunities and challenges that came from the South with the regional perspective, not the European or the common Western point of view, but the regional perspective. And I think this webinar was a great opportunity to achieve that. And thank you for sharing all the visions and all your perspectives on security issues that are affecting the Gulf of Guinea in order to have a common understanding of these challenges. So I think maritime safety and maritime security needs the maritime domain awareness. And we need to have an architecture of maritime security and cooperation across all West African and Central African states with an holistic approach to face all these threats and challenges regarding maritime security. So thank you again on behalf of our director for having the time and to share your vast experience. So now, Ian.
I have nothing else to say, but thank you. And let's just remember those words when requested. So much appreciated to all of you. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you very much all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye all.